Welcome to the Zapruder Film Symposium, Is Seeing Believing in the Death of JFK?
My background is in engineering and physics. In Australia it's slightly different the way our degrees work. Our undergraduate degree in engineering basically qualifies you to be an engineer. I did engineering, got hooked into physics, so I completed a Bachelor of Science in Physics and then went on and did PhD in Physics. Currently I'm an underemployed physicist. I'm a school teacher teaching mathematics at Mentone Grammar in Bayside suburb of Melbourne. However, that gives me a bit of spare time and a bit of flexibility, spare time and some flexibility to look at things like the assassination without any sort of pressure from funding agencies, which in Australia all the universities are run by the federal government. And I met up with some colleagues last year and they said if you were still at Melbourne University working there as on the staff, as I was a few years ago, you would have been tapped on the shoulder and told to work on something a bit more serious, because people have been told that in the past. So it's a strange confluence of events, a few strange coincidences that that has brought me here, and again I thank Jim for inviting me here. Let me first start off with the Zapruder film as I look at it these days. I tried to put together the most complete form of the Zapruder film, including everything I knew about it, even after I knew that it wasn't a real film. You can't start by criticising the Zapruder film and saying none of it makes sense to me. If I said that to you, you'd probably say, well, you probably don't understand very much about the film at all. A lot of the film does make sense. Technically, the film is very good. In fact, it's brilliant, as I'll mention in a moment. And it's only the deviations from that technical perfection which really tell you that something is wrong, okay? Against a background where everything is actually correct and there are things that are impossible, that's what tells you that you understand what's going on, for a start, but then you come up with the evidence that it's just not genuine. So if I present some things which tend to make it look as if the film is more genuine, that's the background against which I'm putting it against. So this does not quite look like the Zapruder film that Jim put up this morning. It's slightly warped from what you've seen, and it's got a couple of extra features. This is just the first frame, which is a bit bluer. Roland Zavada's famous first frame overexposure, which unfortunately is not here to discuss with us. But there are a number of things, I might use the pointer on here. There are a number of things that have been done with this from the MPI disc, which is where these frames come from, or at least the ones that weren't skipped out. The size was wrong. MPI made a number of mistakes. Laser pointer? Yeah, I could do with that. Thanks. Jim's mentioned many of the mistakes that MPI made in terms of completely skipping frames. So the numbers were wrong towards the end of the film. The earlier frames that were missing weren't MPI's fault. They were actually spliced out of the film in the early days. But the size of the film was wrong as well. If you get the DVD, the claim is that it's incompetence. All of these things were just incompetence. And Jim's frames, unfortunately, weren't corrected for the fact that they're stretched horizontally. And that's one thing that Jack has struggled with and I struggled with originally. And when we came together some years later, we found out that we came with exactly the same solution. It's also something that's thrown at me as a red herring. As recently as just a month or two ago, oh, you probably didn't take into account the MPI frames are stretched. And I said, well, you're a couple of years behind the times, because that was an old issue. Down here you see I've got this blue mask over the things that aren't as interesting. We're going to look at some of the sprocket holes, well, one particular sprocket hole later on. But I've covered that over. What we've got here are some extra little panels which actually come from the frame before. There's no frame before the first frame, so that's black, and the frame afterwards. So this is frame 1. This comes from the top of frame 2. In fact, it comes from this area. Well, actually, there are frames before the first frame. There was a bit of footage of of, who was it, the Hesters and Marilyn Sitzman on a park bench that comes before the film, which has got an interesting twist of its own, and Jack learnt something yesterday. He saw the full version of that, which is something like 50 or 60 frames, not the 6 frames that you often see. In fact, it's hidden on the end of Grodin's version of the Zapruder film. I happened to be playing Grodin's version in front of my students one day in class, because they've seen all this stuff many times. It's the one way to get a class of students to be absolutely quiet, start talking about JFK, and every single one of them wants to know about it. Every single one of them. The interest, from what I hear from Jack, the interest among Australians is probably more than the average American. I've had maybe one student that says, that's in the past, why worry about it? It affected Australians, we're very close allies with the United States, as the recent war illustrates. We rely on the United States for our defence to a large extent, and people were worried and continue to be worried about what the assassination means in terms of recent history, world history and world power. And people that were alive at the time tell me that they never bought the official story. I don't know whether we're more sceptical than Americans. We've got a convict background, so we don't take well to authority. And so I've actually got a quota from Robin to get 2 laughs out of you, Jim, so I've already got 1. So I only noticed the extra many frames at the start of the Zapruder film where Sitzman actually turns right around. Jack posted one that I'd posted from the Grodin film. And it's very strange if you look at the Zavada report and other things as to what happened to all of these extra frames at the start of the film. Not just a fraction of a second, but many seconds worth showing them sitting on the park bench. That's just one fascinating aspect which I won't touch on again today unless somebody asks me. So this is the first frame. You also notice the edges are sort of a bit bent. And that's got to do with the pincushion distortion, which I'll talk about. I'll go right back to basics and give you a rough idea what pincushion distortion is. This is, if you like, the final product where it's all put together. The frames that were missing, as Jim has done with his frames, I took the frames off Robert Grodin's disc and put them in to this copy. I actually sized them and colour corrected them as much as possible so they look like they're part of the same film. The only thing is you'll notice that they don't have any sprocket hole area, but when you look at it at full speed, it's almost seamless, except the very last frame I didn't do a very good job with. I just wanted to play it for a little while just to talk about some of the things on the actual film that I'll be discussing, so they're not taken in isolation. You've actually seen them running full time, so you know what I'm talking about when I come back to them later. So if you like, this is a preliminary run through. Now Jim stepped through this and played the 4 versions of it earlier today. This doesn't look quite the same because of those differences. There's other things with the MPI version as well. The version on videotape, as Jim played, seems quite colourful. The version on DVD seems to have had the brightness brought down and the colour saturation washed out. Now, Gary Mack says, oh, that's just because the film's getting old, but many people here know what Gary Mack's answers are usually like. Well, I'll just start to talk about a few things. What we actually have, and I'm going to talk about this later, if we just look at the normal area between the sprocket holes, David Mantic investigated this in the National Archives when he first had a chance to look at it before MPI put out their version. I might turn it off so we don't get too motion sick. These ghost images, and the explanation for them, which seems to make good sense, and I'm looking forward to pulling apart that Bell & Howell camera because I haven't actually pulled one apart before. I've relied on Rick to send me images of what it looks like inside. But the explanation is that the lens of the camera allows in a certain amount of light, and of course this is what's designed to be shown on a projector. Okay, you don't normally see this stuff here. That's not part of the camera design. That's just an accident of the particular Zapruder camera. And so if you imagine that's the centre. When I talk about the centre of the frame, that's the centre of the frame. Not over here somewhere, but the centre of what you'd expect to be the designed area for viewing on a projector. And imagine a big circle around here. There was some valuable work done by Zapruder in his investigation and his report. And this is one of the aspects in terms of looking at this circle of light that's admitted by the lens before it comes through to the gate. It spreads out to the maximum extent. It sort of drops off after this. It spreads out to the maximum extent when you're in telephoto mode, which is what Zapruder was using. When you pull back to a wide angle, I think it's the smallest amount of extra light. Inside there's a gate that's shaped like this, and that's basically a mask to make sure that you only expose whatever, say this is frame 100, you only expose frame 100 with that light. The light that's bleeding up here, and here's frame 99, you're not putting another image on top of frame 99 or frame 101. And it has to have a bit more room up here, of course, for the mechanism that's pulling the film down frame by frame. So it's a little bit larger. So when you overlap those two things, you actually get this bit of exposure onto the frame before that actually belongs. These are the buildings. If there's a building here, a bit blurry this one, I've stopped on a bad one. But this is actually above the Zapruder film. If something is bright enough, it's a double exposure in that area. If something is bright enough, so these are actually the feet of the people in the frame before. If there's something bright enough above the Zapruder frame area, you can actually see it there. And same thing down here. If there's something actually bright enough, you can see it often in this area. So it depends on whether, and the same thing here, that's a double exposure. So you can see the lamp pole. Let me try and get it to stop on a clearer frame. You can see the lamp pole, and the double exposure from this frame is just some of this grass, this side of the grassy knoll. So it doesn't really show through, except there's a bit of a green tinge. And same thing there's nothing really here from the top of the frame before. So I'm going to be talking about these ghost frames, these ghost panels, in some more detail later on. That's about the only explanation I'm going to give of where they come from. And if you actually look in them, you've got to be careful because you might be seeing something which is not really there. But as you get down here, you actually see the back of the limousine and the fender of the motorcycle on the near side, which don't actually appear in the Zapruder film. So by looking down here and looking up here, you can actually see some grass here. You can see this side of the grassy knoll. So by looking in these ghost panels, and I've attached them here so you can look at them as they should be seen, you can actually see sometimes things that are above, and that was the top of that concrete, not monument, but pillar. You saw the top of the pillar go past. And down here, if you have a look, you see here, grass. You can actually sometimes see things above and below the Zapruder film as you've looked at it in this area.
John, looks like real grass, by the way. My contrast with what's on the other side. We have an internal measure right there. That grass in the right.
This grass?
You see the grass there below that point. Yeah.
Yeah, well there's grass on that side, and coming up there's grass on this side. That's part of the grassy knoll there in front of the picket fence.
Right there, I see it right there, right there.
Yeah, well some of it's the tree. You're seeing some of the tree through there as well, because the tree's there and you're getting grass on top. But the one at the end of the film is particularly good. Let me try and stop it when it gets to the end of the film. That it's really the grass that's there. Now there's the motorcycle you can see that stops, and there's the shadow of the back of the limousine.
You said the motorcycle stops?
Well, he stops very quickly. Very quick. I mean, the motion is not inconsistent. I'm not quite sure about David Mantick's analysis of that motorcycle fender. It's not inconsistent motion. It doesn't jump around, but it stops very quickly. He sort of slams on the brakes and lets the limousine keep going, according to this film. But this is actually the grass that goes in front of this picket fence. Okay, there's a bit of grass there. Well, there's some more there. We're going to look at how this all matches in with Dealey Plaza shortly. So I just wanted to show you that as a motion, and you can see the trees and you can see some of the buildings here sometimes. There's some buildings. It's a bit hard to see unless you're used to it. There's some buildings. Top of the structure there, and you see some peristyle, that white stuff. That's the peristyle that's up in the distance that disappears off the top of the frame. You get a little glimpse. You get double exposure glimpse. So you've got to be careful what you interpret there. If you... some of the other things that are worth noting, as Jack mentioned, I don't know if Jack mentioned, but these people here, you see that they don't do anything. You can see that in any copy of the film. It's a little bit easier when you've got the sprocket hole area as well, but they basically just stand there and don't do anything as the president comes past. One guy claps, everyone else just stands there. They don't even turn their heads, they don't turn around. Right, here they are waiting. And then we've got the camera stop, and they're still waiting. Waiting, 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 waiting. President's gone past. So someone needed to tell them that the president had just driven past, because they don't react. They don't react. It's of course, that running man, you know, the men that run up the grass, that appear to be, because of the blurring, you don't see them very much right at the end of the film. I've always wondered, what are they running away from? If the shots were coming from this direction, why are they running away from the triple underpass? Unless there was some danger there. Of course, we have Mary Moorman and Jean Hill, who I've just brought. David Mantick's been very good to bring along all of the Life magazine issues, which I'll mention briefly. I invite anybody to have a look through all of these issues that shows Zapruder frames of Life magazine, the complete set, to find these very photogenic and conspicuous bystanders, because they never appear. Life thought they're not worth showing in Life magazine, in colour or in black and white, which tells you something in itself. Now this, I'll talk about that in a moment. So you can see here, there's the fender of the, you call it fender, yeah, of the motorcycle that's on this side of the limousine. This is really on this side. This is really below, and you often see the right side, yeah. You often see the back of the limousine, and you see stripes on the road, you see shadows of the back of the limousine, you see the shadow of the handhold on this right side of the limousine on the ground. And as I said, it makes it look as if I'm trying to argue that it's all authentic. I don't know if you've got a puff of smoke up there or something. But probably most people are now aware of the signs. There was a Thornton sign up here. Here's the Stemmons Freeway sign, which goes across the field of view. There's the wall in the background I'm going to use for some for a purpose I'll tell you about shortly. Here's Main Street, there's Commerce Street, and of course the limousine's going down Elm Street for those people that haven't studied the film in great detail. The other thing I was going to say about the Stemmons Freeway sign here, if I can stop it, it's starting to come towards the sprocket hole area, and also there should be ghost images for people standing next to or below this part of the Stemmons Freeway sign. And of course that's where the life damaged the frames. So whether there was a mistake made underneath the Stemmons sign which reflected, well, there's actually a person there. Remember that person I was telling you about, Jack? Yeah. I don't know who that person is here, but you can see a person underneath the Stemmons Freeway sign. There's some sort of legs and arms. So there's a few interesting things to be found in these ghost panels. And here, in fact, I've managed to freeze a good one. Those of you familiar with Dealey Plaza, and I'll show you some more images in a moment, there's a big concrete, white concrete, not a monument, it's just like a big pillar, like a cuboid, a box, that sticks up here for some reason, maybe some design reason. And these are the windows in the records building. The records building behind, and the windows, and you'll see those shortly. So you can actually see above the Zapruder film and below it, if there's something bright enough or there's a silhouette there and you're not distracted by what's actually here. So you've got to be careful. You can see her down here sometimes. You've got to be careful you're not misinterpreting what's going on. I don't think there's anything else, apart from these guys, of course, which are still looking up the street, waiting for the limousine to come around the corner, and just drops his arms in exasperation. Where's the president? Of course, he's already gone past. You notice there's a couple of flickers here in this part of the film that I just went past. They're the two frames that Jim put back into the film, but I put them in and I smudged over some of the edges, and it looks like they fit in. If I do it frame by frame, you'd see the copies aren't very good because they come from small images off Grodin's CD. That's probably enough. Oh, there's just smoke up there. Oh, up here you can often see. You see here this. You look at this part here and you say, hang on, there's a lamp pole and there's the underpass. What's this? Well, this is a ghost image. So then you go up to here and say, right, oh, it's just the trees. I can see the top of these trees. And if you look carefully enough, you can actually see a tree branch, and you can see it branching off, and so on. And here we've got the grass down here again. And you can even see the bottom of the other tree. So it's you could spend years having fun looking for things in the ghost panels, because they basically all work out. This is, I've said this before, it's hard to give praise to something which is such an evil creation. It's I don't know if there's a word for it in the English language, to something which is so brilliant and so dastardly at the same time. Sorry? Machiavellian? I think that's about right. It's close to perfect. Of course, if it was perfect, I wouldn't be here, so let's have a look. It is based on a true story. It wasn't a complete fabrication. Some of my students say, what are you telling me, that Kennedy's still alive and he's hanging out with Elvis somewhere and Saddam Hussein? Yeah, and Lee Harvey Oswald. No, I mean, it's based on a true story. It's a modification of the story, but based on real footage. Some technical things. The pincushion distortion, which I'll describe in a moment, is mainly correct. And I've only got one blatant example where it's not correct. So in other words, I've looked at the whole film and everything works out beautifully except one thing. And it's so blatantly wrong, and it has such an explanation about why it's wrong, that it's the strongest evidence for alteration as a first step. The motion blurring. I'll talk about this a little bit later. This is a very important constraint on the film in terms of deleting frames, as David Healy was speaking about. You have to be careful. If you look at the motion blurring of the film, because the Zapruder camera had a relatively slow shutter speed, if you think of it as a photographic camera, something like a 40th of a second. Nearly half of the time, the shutter was open, and just a little over half of the time, the shutter was closed. So as you're moving along, either the foreground or the background is going to be blurred. And it's a pretty easy physics question to check whether that blurring makes sense according to the motion of what's in the film. And it's mainly correct, with one significant exception which I'll come to. And again, I'm saying this is why what I'm going to show you is more powerful, not because everything is wrong, but because everything is right, and one thing stands out. Well, we have an expression in Australia, it stands out like dog's balls. I don't know if you say that over here, but it just stands out among everything else being... Yeah, I got my quota. And I haven't even got to my funny videos yet. Everything is perfect, and these mistakes just stand out. And when you see them, and with a bit of work, they really hit you in the face. Ghost images, as I've just shown you, most of them are correct. You've seen that with your own eyes, and I didn't want to just tell you that without showing you as a rough overview that the ghost images work out correctly. What's very impressive, the interactions between these three effects. There are examples where it doesn't make sense unless you take into account motion blurring and the ghost images and the pincushion distortion. Any one of them individually doesn't make sense. You put all three together and it's self-consistent. So we're talking about something which is very well done. In fact, if there was no evidence of alteration, these would be the strongest pieces of evidence for it being genuine. because it seems almost impossible to be able to create this sort of consistency in the film. Technically, it's just, and in fact, those who believe in alteration use this argument on me and led me through some of these various steps along the way to discover how good the film is. And with 486 frames, I could study these until the cows come home, and I probably wouldn't find any mistakes unless I had some other hints as to where to look for the mistakes. So that's a very important point as well. And most of the errors, with some exceptions, and I'll come back to them, most of the errors took people, researchers, probably 30 to 40 years to detect. Generally as a widespread recognition or opinion that the film may not be authentic, it's probably only been in the last 10 years. And some would say maybe in the last 5 years that you're even getting a sizable proportion of researchers who really accept the fact that there's something wrong with the film. So that again points to how good it is. 30, 40 years is a long time. But on the other side, I want to convince you it is a hoax, beyond any doubt. And understanding why it's false is, of course, the top priority. The second part of it is not just that it's altered. I'll give you strong evidence that it's altered. But the second part is that it's completely fabricated, which is where I will diverge slightly from David Healy in some respects. There is a bit of a twist to the story which sort of brings a few threads together. Essentially, apart from the bogus wound to the head, which was probably painted in, everything else was basically created from real footage. We're not talking about Walt Disney creation. It wasn't an animation, apart from a couple of things. They used real footage and put it together, real images, and put it together to create what we see today. So I'm not talking about a Disney animation. At the end, I'll come back to what I think the timeline for the fabrication is, because that's the main, or some would say only, argument against alteration, is this apparent timeline where it existed so quickly. How could you possibly do it? Even in 4 days. I'll argue that David's version of what could be created in 4 days would not satisfy all of these other tests I'm talking about, and that's part of the story. I'll wrap it all up together and give my opinion as to how it could have come together. As you can imagine, I'm going to talk about pincushion distortion and things like that. I have to give you a little bit of an overview of how imaging systems work, or at least the bits that are important for us. This will be very general level. I won't go into any equations or technical details, but you need some sort of background to understand what I'm talking about. Because I have to convince you that what I'm showing you here is genuine and it's right before you can draw conclusions from that. If you don't trust the physics that I'm telling you, then it could mean anything. I could be up here making up stuff and most of you probably wouldn't know, except for the physicists in the audience. What I'll first show you is an image out of a book. It's actually on computer graphics from the mid-1980s on imaging systems. Now, you don't have to know any of these things that are shown here. I won't be testing you at the end. But essentially, an ideal imaging system is what you get in 3D computer games. You go into a computer game and you can turn around and look up and down and move around. The technology, the equations, the mathematics that goes into a 3D computer game is the same sort of mathematics you need to understand photographs, or ideal photographs. No camera's ideal. It's made out of real pieces of glass and you have to make some trade-offs. But an ideal system, you have basically this projection plane, like a window. Microsoft would like us to call it a window. You've got a window on the world, which is flat. This is the ideal case, when it's flat. And you're looking through that window. From your eye, just take one eye at a time, you're looking through that window at the world, at that blackboard and the roof and so on. And basically the way that that window image is obtained, and this is how they do it in computer games and all 3D graphics, is they project all of the points of the real object in three-dimensional space through to your eye, and where it hits that projection plane, that's basically your image. You can see here you're looking at it sort of through the middle, and so you get two squares, the front on the outside and the back on the inside. So you can understand all imaging systems mapping the 3D world onto a flat 2D plane, flat 2D sheet of paper if you like, in this way. So what's important is you've got an eye position, you've got a direction of view, right, which goes straight through the middle of that plane, and you've got this plane, this flat sheet. Okay, that's the basic idea. So as you look around, or as you turn your eye, but I'll move my body, okay, you're moving, the direction and the plane are moving with it. One tool that I use to analyse the film is the ability to change the direction of view, almost like a computer game. That you can take an image. Now what I've done is taken one of the ones you saw from Jack's presentation, photographed by the Dallas Police Department some days after the assassination. Jack says it's Monday, Gary Mack says it's Wednesday, but Gary Mack confirmed it was from the pedestal, so that satisfied me. Taking this image, which we'll come back to in a moment because it'll be important to us, if you understand the distortion in the image, and this one's not too bad in distortion, and you understand how far things are away, so you've got some idea of your field of view, so if you know your camera or you do some measurements, you can actually change the image to look to the left. Right now we're looking right down the middle of this image. You can simulate looking to the left and looking to the right, looking up and looking down. Okay? You can't bring in any more image from here. We don't know what's over here, so this will move and nothing will come in. It'll just be black. But you can, I'll just show you how that works. You can look to the left, you can look to the right, back to the middle, you can look down and you can look up. And what you have here, you want to do that. Is that as you look to the left and that image moves around to the right, you notice these lines are coming down like this, okay, to a vanishing point. Those of you that are artists will know how vanishing points work. All parallel sets of lines in a certain direction go to a vanishing point. If you change your direction of view, all the vanishing points shift. So as I look to the left, this building, all those lines go to a new vanishing point. As you look around to the right, it keystones in the other direction. And as you look up, as you look down, of course the building looks like that. And that's why some professional photographers had to use perspective correcting lenses in the past, and now they do it on computer. They can correct the perspective. Okay, so these are the effect of perspective or changing the direction of view, which is really the same thing. Excuse me. For an ideal imaging system. So that's one of the tools that we use to look at the film. There's some trade-offs for real imaging systems, like all of these cameras and the projector. There are trade-offs. Some of the things you minimise, and you'll see this word in a moment. Chromatic aberration just means coloured fringes on things, basically. If you have a really poor lens, like you get someone in a high school physics class to design a lens, if they do coloured objects, they'll probably find that it's got coloured edges on things. And people don't like coloured edges on things. If you've got a white line, you don't want it to turn into 3 different colours, or the whole spectrum of the rainbow. Some overhead data projectors are very bad on this. You notice the 3 colours, or the overhead, the 3-gun TVs are bad. So you want to minimise this sort of thing. You want to minimise loss of focus, which are spherical aberration and coma and astigmatism, which is changing the shapes. You want to minimise those sort of things because people don't like the edges of the photo to be blurry. What you normally do in most lens systems for high quality objects, and you've got to understand this optics has been understood for hundreds of years. They've been grinding glasses and telescopes and so on. So it's really an art form, but it's also well understood in terms of the mathematics and the physics. going back to Isaac Newton, essentially, in some of its aspects. It's not a joke. He had a book on optics. It's understood since Newton's time. The compromise usually is that you allow a small amount of pincushion distortion or barrel distortion, depending on what sort of lens system you're creating. So you want to get rid of these things that really look bad, coloured edges, loss of focus, but you don't mind if the image is a little bit distorted. Perfectly in focus, colour's perfectly sharp, but the whole image is a little bit distorted if you really look at it closely. This is a photograph that Jack took last year. It's his 5th photograph. I'll show you in a moment how they were all used. But just as an example photograph with a few vertical things in it, just a run-of-the-mill photograph, and I'll show you what pincushion and barrel distortion are. That's pincushion distortion, and that's barrel distortion, and that's back to the original photo. So pincushion distortion is pulling the corners out like a pincushion, and barrel distortion, which you may have seen if you have a wide-angle lens on your camera, or a fisheye lens, it's even worse, or even some digital cameras and some video recorders, some camcorders allow you to do a fisheye effect because it looks sort of funky and kids like doing it. You get that barrel effect. So there's the barrel. You notice things in the middle are basically unchanged. Everything's stretched. It's like a piece of rubber. The whole thing is stretched. These parts are sort of stretched and these parts are stretched the most. And vice versa if you're doing a barrel distortion, squashed in. You notice these things are bending a bit. Now normally the effects aren't as drastic as here, but I wanted to show you how the effect works so you know what I'm talking about. The actual effects in the film are much smaller, but they're still of the same nature. Just quickly, barrel distortion. An example of barrel distortion is if you're short-sighted and you have spectacles, eyeglasses, and you might have noticed if you do wear glasses and you're short-sighted that up in the corner, right now that light over there is in the corner if I was wearing my glasses, and the corner sort of brought in. Okay, things are not in the right position as you go across the edge of your glasses, as long as they're strong enough. And so it's typically for concave lenses. You notice your short-sighted glasses are like that. If you hold the glasses up, it tends to shrink things, not like a magnifying glass. It does the opposite. Typical for wide-angle lenses, you get that sort of barreling. Pincushion distortion is, as you'd expect, the opposite. If you're long-sighted, you use those terms here, don't you? Short-sighted, long-sighted? Right. Far-sighted, near-sighted. Okay, so this is the opposite case. You've got convex lens, and if you hold it up, it magnifies, which is what you're trying to do with a telephoto lens. That's just a rough overview, but when you put all the lenses together and you try and do some optics and try and come up with a lens system which minimises everything, this is typically what you find, that for things that magnify, telephoto lenses, you tend to get a bit of pincushion distortion, and wide-angle lenses you get the barrel. If we now look at the Zapruder camera, which I'm again looking forward to disassembling one, arguably set on maximum telephoto zoom, and Rick took some frames with his particular camera, which is the same, essentially the same model for the optical properties, and the well, I'll mention that as well. The frames he found within a fraction of a %. There was a slight discrepancy, but I was prepared to pay the Zapruder camera on that one, that it seemed to be about the right zoom level, and the zoom also agrees with the lens system. If you do detailed measurements, they all agree. These Zapruder film frames, as I'm going to show you shortly, all of them tend to agree with this setting. There's no, it doesn't look to me as if there's any change in zoom. For this camera, you do expect a little bit of pincushion distortion, and in the, I think it's in the Zapruder report, is that right, David? The patent for the Zapruder lens is one of the attachments. And so you can actually look it up. It's a little bit difficult to decipher, as most patents are. That's patent in '63, but of course applied for in 1959. So this is the one in the Zapruder camera, and it goes through many technical things in a very highly abbreviated way that the patent office uses. But the important thing, these things are highly corrected. I mean, this was a very good camera for 1963, probably top of the line home 8mm movie camera as far as I can tell. And so this zoom lens was important enough to have its own patent, and all these things are highly corrected over range of focus and a range of zoom, which is, I wouldn't like to design these lenses if it was my job, because there are so many. If you look at the next page of this in the Zapruder report, it's very daunting in terms of how many parameters you have to control. But the important thing is here, distortion also is highly corrected, but it's slightly compromised, about 3.5%. So they're giving a figure in the patent for this lens system, which is in the Zapruder camera, about 3.5% of distortion. What I did when I was made aware of the distortion of the film, it's a little bit hard to know before you start that there's going to be how much distortion there's going to be, because you need to understand what's in Dealey Plaza. One way to measure it is to use the observation that if you do have that ideal imaging system, any straight line in three-dimensional space, like the edge of that blackboard or that straight line, that straight line, that straight line, if you have an ideal imaging system, those straight lines will be straight on my image. Okay? They won't necessarily still be parallel, they have vanishing points and so on, but straight lines on an ideal imaging system will stay straight. And of course that white wall in the background that goes up into the distance to the peristyle is straight in Dealey Plaza. And you know, I actually got to smack it and walk along it in the last few days and confirm that it is straight. It's dead straight, and it should be straight. If there was an ideal camera, it should be straight. So what I did is measured many points along the wall and grunted through some mathematical equations, which would probably give you a heart attack, and figured out what this distortion parameter was for the film frames that I had. And it was equivalent to 3.6% at the corners of the frame as it was designed, not in the sprocket hole, because that wasn't. 3.6%, so that seemed to be consistent with the patent, and suggested that we had a good understanding of the distortion. This is an example of the pincushion distortion, and this was probably one of the frames I actually used. It's fairly clear, and the wall is towards the top of the frame. You see a fair bit of it, and hopefully this projector's quite good. But this blue line here has been put on using Photoshop digitally. It's perfectly straight, so if it doesn't look straight to you, it is straight. It's just the distortion of this gadget that might make it not straight. And you notice this sort of bends away from the edge. There is another sort of line that goes along the wall here which bends away from the blue line as well, which is why I put the blue line there. And you can see, because one effect of pulling the corners out is that you bend lines. You don't just make things bigger and smaller, you actually bend straight lines as long as they're not just going straight through the middle. And that provided that measurement I referred to. So in the raw frame as you have it, after you fix up MPI's mistakes, it's not straight. When you correct the distortion, now it's straight. Okay, so there's the raw frame as you get it on the Zapruder film. You do the pincushion distortion, now it's beautifully straight. And once you determine what the distortion is for the camera, that applies to the whole film. You don't do it frame by frame, you do it just once. Zapruder's camera had this particular distortion coefficient, and you put it into the computer, and you can do this for every frame and just set it running overnight and correct all of the frames in this way. And that's how I created those frames at the start that I showed you in the film. Another example, frame 389, just as an example. Now this isn't quite as clear-cut a case because it's we're talking about Main Street. Main Street, if you look from above, is straight. If you look from the side, well, the slope might change slightly, But over one Zapruder frame, it's essentially straight. It's essentially straight. In fact, even Elm Street is almost straight if you look at one frame, because it's so tightly zoomed in, it's essentially straight. And again, if you notice here, these, well, all of these parts of Main Street are sort of bent. And if you apply the same correction that you determined elsewhere in the film, remove the distortion, and now it's pretty well straight. There's a very slight variation because it's not a wall that's been measured with a ruler. It's a road that might have a slight variation in its slope. But you notice also that Elm Street becomes a little bit straighter. It doesn't bend around so much. And in fact, if you go to the middle of the film, the limousine doesn't bend as much. You might have noticed that the edge of the limousine, some of you that have studied the film for a long time, the limousine's got a bit of a bend to it. When you correct the distortion, it's basically straight. Okay, there's rounded edges on the limousine, but it looks just a little bit more realistic. So again, these are things that are correct about the film. So we understand the pincushion distortion and pretty well established that. The second question is whether we really understood the geometry of Dealey Plaza, okay, the three-dimensional geometry. If you don't have an understanding of that and a way of measuring that with mathematics and measurements, both as a plan and in terms of height, then it's very hard to compare things with other photographs or even with modern day measurements. So that was the question. I think it was a bit of a challenge that someone put out there. Can you make a panorama of Dealey Plaza today that covers the whole plaza as seen from where Zapruder took his film? So July last year, Jack very kindly went down to the Zapruder pedestal and somehow managed to get up there with a tripod and took 16 photographs. You helped him get up? Or you took the photographs? He took the photographs. I don't know how he got up. You lifted him. I don't know how he got up there, but 16 photographs basically on a tripod, 10 degrees each time from the Zapruder camera position. I'll take these off so I go. And the challenge then was, all right, here's the 16 photographs, stitch them together. If you think you know what you're doing with the mathematics, with the three-dimensional geometry, with the computer, stick them together. I don't know if you gave me that challenge, did you, Jack?
I couldn't do it.
But there was a bit of pressure on from other quarters once Jack posted his photographs. So I just wanted to show you the photographs that he took so you can understand the difficulty in putting together a panorama. Other people have done it. Scott Myers did a good one, and I think some other people maybe here have done one. The difficulty you have is that as he moves 10 degrees around each time, the angle, and you can see that a small piece of Elm Street is basically straight because it's such a small piece it looks straight. Jack's camera doesn't have very much distortion. But as you change your direction of view, all the perspective changes. The vanishing points change for those artists among you. And it's very hard to stitch all these together when you've got this photo and this one overlaps it, and this one overlaps it, this one. In fact, these two are, I guess, the clearest one. Here it looks like it's bending that way. Here it's going uphill, whereas a fair portion of the photo is actually the same thing. Okay, and that's the problem. You're trying to stitch together something which is on that plane and something which is on that plane. Okay, and they don't match up. They match at one point, but they don't match up. The perspective is completely different, which is why it's very hard to do a full 180-degree panorama of Dealey Plaza and not have a kink in the middle where you sort of match it together. It's not insurmountable though if you've got enough mathematics behind you and a few computer programs and a bit of time. You can stitch them together. So for those of you that haven't had the chance to go down there, which up until 3 days ago included myself, I wanted to show you what Dealey Plaza looks like from the Zapruder pedestal, from about the right height. You can see here, this is one of Jack's photographs here, and there I took the dates out. I deleted all of the people and the cars that were moving because there was enough overlap usually to fill in the details from something else. And with the wonders of modern technology, you can stitch them together without any cut lines, without any seams in that, David. So the whole image is about 4,500 pixels wide. So the only way I can show you is to pan the whole thing. A little bit jerky at times. The computer's pretty powerful, but not fully. And that's pretty well what it looks like. As I stood up there with my printout of this, or something similar, I'll show you in a moment, and looked around, it was the only place. It's sorry. No. I'm not finished. Sorry, it was fairly emotional standing up there and seeing where everything happened. It was basically the only place I'll ever visit in the world that I already knew before I went there. I'd worked with this for 6 months or whatever, 9, 8, 10 months, as in this form, and knew what it looked like. Now I didn't. It was actually quite strange because there are many directions in Dealey Plaza which were not photographed at all on the day of the assassination. That's not as clear to people that have lived in the area their whole life, that have actually seen it before they get to this stage. There were many times when I turned a corner, in particular at the top of Elm Street, looking down the Elm Street extension. It felt like I was looking behind a movie set at Hollywood. That never appears just about anywhere, except one photo Jack showed. It doesn't appear anywhere in all of the extant photographs of the assassination. There are many directions of looking at Dealey Plaza which are not shown at all. There's very few viewpoints. There are a lot of people at the corner of Main Street and, well, I better not refer to the streets, I'll try and pull it up on here. Done it again. Okay. There are, well, there's the Zapruder viewpoint. There's a number of people here taking photographs down the street, Willis and Betzner and so on. There's a couple of people up in the depository, or at least Elsie Dorman up there taking a film down the street, down Houston Street, and sort of misses the limo turning the corner. And there's a number of people over here taking photographs looking down Houston Street, or looking from here across Dealey Plaza. But there are many other directions which aren't represented at all. There's nobody at the top of Elm Street looking down from the other sides of the street, for example. And it is quite bizarre when I went here that, as I said, you're looking at it and you know it inside out from a certain viewpoint. You walk 50 yards down the street and turn a corner and you say, I've never seen this in my life, which is quite bizarre. And it says something about the way the photographs were collected and restricted, and the ones that we have now show only selected things, mainly to avoid any overlap as far as possible, with a few major exceptions. So that is pretty well what you see in Dealey Plaza, at least from that one position. There is, oh, I'll wait till it comes back. I wanted to show, no, I'll do that in another one. The question then is, there's a panorama, but how accurate is it? All right, it looks nice and seamless, but that could just be a trick. So what I did was I compared it to the topographic survey, the map of Dealey Plaza that was done by surveyors in the late 70s, although it was a revised one in 1981. I don't know the history of that map, and anybody that can tell me would be very interesting. Which up to this point has seemed to be a fairly accurate map. Whatever else the HSCA did, the map they had commissioned seems to be fairly accurate. The nice thing about the map is that it gives not only a map view, but also gives the heights compared to a reference height of many positions, accurately marked positions in Dealey Plaza. Very important positions, including the Zapruder pedestal and the curve, the top of the curve, the bottom of the curve, all these things have got height elevation measurements. which is quite powerful. I've got, of course, the north in there, and the scale. Actually, no, I don't think the scale's on it, but the scale is known. And so you can actually use that to compare things in three-dimensional space, both in terms of direction from Zupruder and elevation and depression from Zupruder. And you can compare those a number of points. You've got to pick points where there are measurements and things you can identify off a photograph. I ended up with over 100 points in both compass bearing and elevation for comparison, and generally, with a couple of exceptions, which always turned out to be something that had been and elevation and depression from Zapruder, and you can compare those a number of points. You've got to pick points where there are measurements and things you can identify off a photograph. I ended up with over 100 points in both compass bearing and elevation for comparison, and generally, with a couple of exceptions, which always turned out to be something that had been moved in the intervening 39 years, generally better than about 0.1 degrees of calibration and registration. In other words, we've really mapped this thing out accurately, which is about 2 inches at 100 feet. Sometimes it even seems to be a bit better. Some relative angles seem to be look a bit better than that, maybe a fraction of that. But as an overall absolute accuracy, it wasn't too bad. So one of the things that lets you do is to put accurate grid lines on this panorama and use it as a map. They're a bit small to see, but you might see 050 degrees, 055 degrees, 060 degrees. That's true bearing from true north. So up just over here we've got east, and we go around to south and so on. And here's elevation, okay? So here's 0 degrees, that's everything that's level with the Zapruder camera. Pretty well. We'd estimated where his camera height was based on some of the photographic evidence. That's 0, that's 5 degrees down, 10 degrees down. So you can do exactly the same thing, just use some more modern technology to overlay all of these grid lines. And they move along too. So that's a useful thing. You can actually look up and then say, right, okay, I'm standing right here. That's my compass bearing from Zupruder, and this is my elevation from Zupruder. You can have a fairly good accuracy there to a tenth of a degree. Question, what about Dealey Plaza in 1963? It's all well and good to know what it looks like now, or last July. What about 40 years ago? As Jack mentioned, there were two, well, in fact there seems to be more than two. There seems to be many versions of this photograph which people have been providing to me recently. But Gary Mack says it's 5 days after the assassination, and it doesn't really make much difference. It's pretty close to the assassination, where you assume that just about all of these buildings are still where they were 5 days before, or 3 days before. That sort of covers, there's the top and there's the middle. You can see they're not going to stitch together unless you do some tricks. There is also a photograph taken some time later, I'm not exactly sure when, of by the FBI's photographic expert, Lyndall Schoenfeld. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, because I never heard anybody say it. He's taking from the Zapruder pedestal, which you can actually check that it's from the right position, down here towards this guy standing in the street, which I presume is marking the headshot at frame 358 or something. I don't know why is there a man standing in the street all the way down there? What happened at that point? I don't have the Warren volume, so I don't know why he showed a photograph with a man standing all the way down in the middle of the street that far down. But in any case, that's not the important part. The important part is we've got a photo which shows things from the Zapruder pedestal. The first question that was raised about this is, how do I know that they are from the Zapruder pedestal? Other than the fact that Gary Mack admitted as much, almost by accident, he said there were reports that they took them from that pedestal. You can compare lines of sight of various objects. If you have one thing in front of another thing, and you're looking at them, and if they line up, and you move your head, they're not going to line up anymore. That's a line of sight. Okay? If two things are at exactly the same point, well, it's going to be the edge of something because you can't see through most things. If you look at, say, this little that monument, there's a statue on the other side, and there's this white thing that sticks up in the same position on this side of Dealey Plaza. I don't know if it's called a monument. And in front of that is this thing here called the peristyle, and they're at a distance apart, and you can see how they line up. And I actually stood on the Zapruder pedestal 2 days ago and saw how far I could move my head before those things are significantly out of alignment. And I couldn't get my head off the pedestal. I was already still on the pedestal before I said, no, I have to come back, I have to come back. I mean, these photographs weren't taken. These photographs weren't taken standing next to the pedestal or on the steps or in the shelter or somewhere else. These were, as claimed, definitely taken from the pedestal. And in fact, Jack did the original work of comparing some lines of sight between photographs he had and objects here and distant buildings. In fact, this and the building behind, the Red Courthouse, is an even better test of that. So we know they're from the top of the Zapruder pedestal, which is important, because if they're from somewhere else.
He took pictures from Zupruder, much more, and Nix, and I have all 3 sets.
Who did?
25 years. That FBI did 3 sets of pictures. That's when you notice. Completely overlapping the Wall Street camera position.
Well, there you go.
So they exist. I got a set of them. Email me.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't been in contact with you before the last...
30 photographs.
Yeah. Yeah, this one which is given to me is particularly useful, yeah. Well, that's so we're making progress already. Very hard from the other side of the planet to communicate with people and obtain things. But the net effect is that you can actually overlay those photographs. Now, you've got to do the same tricks. You've got to take into account a little bit of distortion. You've got to take into account perspective. Then you've got to wrap it onto a sphere surrounding Zapruder, which is the trick that's used to do all this. And then you've got to map it back onto a piece of paper, which is like a Mercator projection, but slightly modified so that it's not so there's equal angles for those physicists in the audience. I just mentioned that. That's basically the tricks you use. The mathematics is a little bit horrific, but computers are good at doing mathematics and they can do it for you. So what you have here is Jack's 2002 panorama poking out the side, because the photograph doesn't go quite that far. Over the top you've got the 3 black and white photographs. Now, unfortunately, this one's a little bit, the quality I had for this one wasn't too good. It was a little bit half-toned, so when I blow up, you'll see a bit of half-toning, you know, little dots like in printing, which if I had a different version, I would have been able to avoid. It's a little bit transparent. There's a little bit of transparency there, so you can actually see Jack's colour one coming through. You see it's sort of greenish here, and where there's no Jack one, it's just grey. And this one covers a far taller, you see right up here and right down here. The buildings, you notice, are vertical now because I've set it all to the vertical, the horizontal plane. There's Jack's one poking through the middle there, and everything matches up very nicely. If you actually overlay the 2 and flick between them, there are very tiny differences in some places, which probably amount to inches of movement. And that matching up at the end is not quite perfect. The one... Well, the one thing doesn't quite match. I've wondered about this curb here at Elm Street. I'm trying to figure out if it is the original curbing. So many things have changed in, been changed in Dealey Plaza. In fact, this panorama gives you some of it. Of course, this is where the pole is now, on the grass, I think. Jack's one doesn't go far enough down. This is where it was in 1963. There's a pole that never was there. This object here lines up, as I said, very nicely. The sign we're going to come to in a moment is a subject in his own right. The curb, excuse me, the curb here works very nicely, except right in front of Zupruder. And the 1963 curb looks lower than what Jack has for me today. Now, I don't know whether that's something to do with a positioning problem, that one of them took the photograph from further back. Maybe the Dallas Police Department took from the back of the pedestal or something. I'm not exactly sure why there's a slight discrepancy, which is why I was looking at this curbing to see if I could verify that it was the original curbing. Jack says it looks the same colour. It's probably...
Make it different if we had a
Well, it could if they didn't try and replicate the right height. But this isn't the Schoenfeld ones. It could well be that if I use the Schoenfeld ones, I'll get better results. So, but you know, this was what I had at the time. Yeah, height differences or distance, either one could have made a little bit of difference. It's where you'd expect it to be, basically the closest position where we've got two things to compare. But basically, all of this all matches up nicely, and you know, you've got the building which is sort of built in one version and being built in the other version. But it's nice you get a feel for where the other side of Elm Street is, and the edge of the grass. Except you've got sort of ghosts. You've got ghosts of the past and flowers of the past overlaid with Jack's one shining through. What Jack found most fascinating was how many of these lamp poles, and we're talking, remember here we're talking this accuracy is very, very tight. If you looked at where these things match up, I mean this building and this thing all matches up perfectly. So when you see that the lamp pole was there and they moved it to there, this lamp pole was there and was there and now it's there, and you know, now there's one there. This one's been moved, that one's been moved. Most of the lamp poles have been moved. And in fact, when we were down there, Jack made me take photographs of all of the. You look at the concrete where the lamp poles were originally in, and there's one obvious place where it came from, where there's holes, you know, 4 holes and a circular piece of concrete. But then there's another patch to the side of it, which is a big rectangular piece, which could well have been, you know, versions 1, 2, and 3, and the hole is version 4, and the current one is version 5. There seems to be a public works program in place to regularly move things around. I'll let this pan back around and I'll tell the best story. Oh, actually, no. The sign that's here now, we were looking at this sign and looking at the plywood and the bracket on the back, because that comes into a few of the arguments. And I asked Jack, what's that thing? He says, well, I don't know. Never seen that before. And it's a little white plastic gadget. I've got photographs on the computer, but I have to process them. Little white gadget, plastic gadget bolted with a bracket to the sign, and it says wireless rain sensor. Wireless rain sensor. And it's got an FCC, you know, approval number at the bottom. So it measures the rain that's falling in Dealey Plaza. which I guess is fair enough. The Weather Bureau must want to know where the rain is falling. But I mean, we walked all over Dealey Plaza, and Jack even climbed down here where you can't get through, somehow down this hill and all around here, and leaving me for dead. The lamp pole on the far side has got another one. So, you know, I asked Jack if it would be a federal offence to unscrew a rain sensor, because if I looked inside it I might be able to figure out what it really is with my electronics background. But this lamp pole, well, not this one, the 2003 version of that and that one, each of those has a rain sensor. So it's quite amazing. The City of Dallas knows if it's raining on this side of Main Street and not raining on that side of Main Street. I mean, that level of accuracy, we don't have that in Australia. We just know if it's raining over Melbourne. You know if it's raining on either side of Main Street.
You missed the big parking sign. There's no parking during assassination.
Oh, is that what that says? Oh. Rain sensors on either side. So look, I don't know if they're microphones or cameras or both, but I'll look at the photos when I get home and try and figure out whether we're being listened to or watched or both when we're doing experiments in Dealey Plaza. The most fun one, which I'll post images of all of these things to Rich's forum, jfkresearch.com. We were doing Mary Moorman in the street measurements here, and my position is that her camera was, where's my belly button? Her camera was about here. So I'm half, Jack has her down here and I've got her here, and I don't know if she's really that short. I have to check. Maybe she's that short and the camera can be that low. But we're measuring things there, and I said to Jack, what are those washers for? He says, what washers? What washers? And we're walking past the back of this lamp pole. This is the 2002. And at the bottom of the lamp pole, between that lamp pole and that piece of concrete that it's mounted on, there were like 4 washers, you know, about that diameter washers, stacked up, and the lamp pole was sitting on them, and they're sort of half sticking out. And Jack says, oh, well, they're probably just balancing up the light pole so that it's not leaning. I said, oh, that's interesting. So I looked around the lamp pole, and there's the same stack of washers all the way around, and underneath, and I got some photos, washers. So I got a measurement, 1 inch. They and the poles all have numbers on them, so I can just imagine Gary Mack rings up and says pole number 2915, raise it by 1 inch, because Jack just took another photo, and we want to just. It really is bizarre. It really is bizarre. Why do you raise a lamp pole by 1 inch? Anybody that says they're not trying to keep us in the dark in these things is. Let's not have too much fun. Question, does the Zapruder film fit? Now there was, I noticed Jack sort of changed his opinion a little bit. Maybe when we were stuck in the airport for 7 hours yesterday, I convinced him of a few things. There was some question about whether the Zapruder film actually fit Dealey Plaza as a whole, that there was some sort of background magnification is why you saw more and more grass and you never seemed to see Main Street until right at the end. It looked at one stage as if they must have made it bigger so that you wouldn't see too much. Unfortunately, that's not true. It does fit. I'll show you in a moment. The film as a whole matches Dealey Plaza. There were some parts where I had to squish things together as tightly as humanly possible to make it fit towards the end of the film, and wasn't completely happy that it was a beautiful fit. But overall it does fit within the errors, and I find no background magnification and no magnification of Tony Foster either. Now we have what on my laptop in the file folder is actually called Frankenstein, because you have Jack's panorama here with the 1963 panorama over the top, and the Zapruder film turned into a panorama over the top of that, using the same tricks. I think I chose about 40 or 60 frames of the Zapruder film and did the same trick of stitching them together. Now up here, when you've got the start of the film, you see a couple of motorcycle ghosts and so on. They basically washed out. Down here, you keep seeing the limousine, because they're the frames I chose. There's no sharp edges. That's one of the tricks. You can make them blend nicely into each other with modern technology, and you have all of this. So this here, you'll see a bit of a blow up of this in a moment, but this part here is from the Zapruder film, including there's a little ghost panel up there, and there's a ghost panel. There's that guy down there under the sign, and there's the Texas 95. Sorry.
Texas Highway Department.
Texas Highway Department sign. Yeah, a little crest-shaped sign underneath on the pole. We'll come to the Stemmen sign in a moment. So you can sort of see the Zapruder frames. Not every single frame, that would have been too much work, but basically enough to get the whole film put together. So there's Tony Foster, not quite as tall as in Jack's version. You see where all the bystanders were standing. The ones that are moving, of course, are blurred because they appear in a couple of different frames. Down here was the toughest squash to get everything together. The tree, of course, is a little bit fatter than it was 40 years ago. But basically, even to the extent of the white wall and the bushes, and even around here, and then in the ghost images you even see Main Street. And then over here it comes back in the top. And down here you get a little bit of bushes, this bush here, and you get this grass in the ghost images. And apart from this guy, which is standing out like a sore thumb, everything fits. So this is what I'm telling you, that most of it seems to work very nicely, and even despite what some people thought, because of reasons I'll show you in a moment. So, you're asking, where's the actual evidence of alteration? I'm not supposed to be proving that it's genuine. But it's hard to put a figure, but as a rough ballpark figure, a gut feeling, we say 95% plus self-consistent. Okay, so it's all understood. We understand where everything was in Dealey Plaza. We understand how the film fits in. We can stitch it together. We've got the mathematics right. We've got the slope of Elm Street right. Mike Pincher said he would eat his clothing if it was only 3 degrees slope on Elm Street, and so now he has quite a menu in front of him. We measured it. We have the photos. We'll post those to jfkresearch.com. It's 3 degrees and it goes up to about 3 3/4 degrees. It looks steep. When you're looking down a hill, it's a sort of foreshortening. It looks quite steep, but 3 degrees is a fair sort of slope. In fact, it's Elm Street slope. So if you ever want to know what a 1 in 20 slope is, and you've been to Elm Street, that's a 1 in 20 slope, which is 3 degrees. The remaining 5% of the film consists of hundreds of small things that aren't quite right, and many of what Jack puts up, some of which I don't agree with, and some of which I prove are wrong, and some he doesn't agree with my proof. But the remaining things, I look at them and say, yeah, something's not right there, but I don't know if I can turn this into a proof. So he says he just likes looking at photos, and no, I'm a scientist, and that's why we think differently. But there are many small things, and I won't go into all of the small things. Jack has gone into many of them, and there's a few more that come out every day. Like Mary Mormon's coat. I think you can forget about Mormon on the grass until you can explain how come her coat is so short. That could just about seal it as far as I'm concerned on that issue. But lots of little things that scientifically there are too many uncertainties. Like where people are standing, you have to figure out where the person is photographing from, where they're photographing from, where the people are. So you've got multi-dimensions, you've got all these things to figure out, where they were, where they were, where they were. Then you've got to work out the perspective. And a lot of the time things are probably wrong, but very hard to prove. Not to you guys, I could tell you anything and you'd probably believe me, but you get people that want to argue with everything. We want things that are, I'm sorry, I wrote this before I knew you were coming. I didn't want to steal your, is that trademark registered or something? Okay. It's a, well, I think it's a legal term, isn't it? Best evidence. That's what I want to concentrate on. I'm getting to it. I hope I'm not taking too long with all of this. Of the things that are really absolutely, that I would stand in court and testify to. The first few things I'm going to show you I would testify to in a court of law without any hesitation for a second. Stedman's freeway sign. A lot of these things were studied originally by David Mantic and Jack White, and a lot of the time I forget to give credit to them all of the time. I probably wouldn't have enough time to give credit to them for everything. It's one of those cases, I don't know if it was Newton or Einstein that said he's standing on the shoulders of giants. You know, if I can see further, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. And that's really what it is. And these guys made a lot of mistakes. And I tell David Mantic, in fact, this particular one, which is the only graph he published in Assassination Science, and I told him, look, it's wrong. And he said, fantastic. And you know you've got a real researcher, a real physicist, a real scientist when he says that. When someone finds something is wrong and he welcomes it, because what that means is we understand something a little bit deeper. Okay? Most people would say, no, I'm not wrong. I've published it, I've got to stand by it. He understands how this works, and that's why he's made such important contributions. The sign seems to get wider as it goes across the film. And that's what was in Assassination Science. And I have to say, this, or just in fact a story about this, was told to me before I'd even known about Assassination Science or Murder in Dealey Plaza or knew who David Mantic was. It got presented to me, I was sort of surrounded by people helping me on the internet who made sure I didn't find anything too useful. And they said, oh, you know, bloody David Mantic, he thinks the film's fake because the sign gets wider, it's just pincushion distortion. And I looked at it, and it turns out it does get wider, and it is pincushion distortion. And so for a little while there I thought, oh, whoever this David Mantic is, he mustn't know what he's talking about. That was, I don't know what the phrase is, but that was a very selective example out of many, many things that David presented in the 2 volumes, which was grossly unfair to pick on one particular result, which the people presenting it to me obviously realised was a mistake. But what that leads you to do is to understand why, and that's the real advantage, the real advance in what David published, is that it provides yet another proof that we understand the pincushion distortion. All right? He finds an anomaly, the sign is too wide. It gets wider as it goes across. Sorry, I'll do it your way. Wider as it goes across this way. Okay? It gets wider. Not a huge amount, 17% or something maximum. You take into account the pincushion distortion, and there's 2 ways of doing it. One way is to correct the pincushion distortion and then measure it, and it's perfectly flat. Constant width all the way through. The other way is to just do the measurements and use a mathematical formula, and you get the same thing. And in fact, I'll show it here. I promised David I'd show this as well. You can see the way the pincushion distortion works, it's maximum over here, which is furthest from the centre. And if you look at that width there, it's coming in a fair way. I mean, this is one example where you can really see what's happening. The pincushion distortion compared to the centre of the frame, which you notice is not changing in size. Okay? It also makes these guys not quite so fat. So if they were worried that they looked really fat in the Zapruder film, I don't know if they're still alive, they actually get a little bit thinner because they're always in the sprocket hole area, and so they look quite fat. This comes in a fair bit. This one's not moving too much, and that explains that up to 17% change in width. So that represents a real advance, or another confirming fact that we understand this pincushion distortion. And that was the first part. In fact, I posted this to Rich's forum about a year ago, and had to say that David's work was wrong. The width, as I was led to find originally, that the width of the sign was in fact correct. But when I was doing it, I noticed something very strange about the way the sign changed. And it wasn't just one frame. I did every single frame where you could see the whole sign. The poles holding up the sign and the edges of the sign are really rectangular in the Zapruder film, as you've seen it before today. The ones that don't have pincushion distortion. They're pretty well rectangular. It's a nice, beautiful sign. In fact, it shouldn't be so beautiful because Zapruder's not looking at it head on. It's facing on the street. It's pointing to the motorists, not pointing to Zapruder, hopefully. And then all of the signs are on about that angle. We've got other photographs which show the angle it's on. But still, the sign, beautiful, rectangular sign. When you correct the pincushion distortion, the width becomes correct, which basically means it sort of points to the right background objects roughly correctly. But the poles do all sorts of weird things. It should be the exact opposite. In the film, it should be doing weird things, and when you correct it, it should turn into a real sign. So I had a second part to this investigation, that this sort of behaviour was impossible. I want to show you this little pincushion barrel thing again. Take a look at these 2 light poles, which are pretty well perfectly vertical in Jack's photo, close enough to vertical. When you pincushion it, they should go out towards the corners, like everything else. It's like a big rubber sheet. You pull the corners out, and these... now let's go back. This should bend a little bit away from the... It should go like that. Should bend like that, because it's like it's on a big rubber sheet with everything else that's real, and when you correct it, it should go back to being the real pole or the real sign. When you correct it, of course, you're bending it in the other way. So what was quickly turning into an impossible stem and sign, I chose 2 particularly clear frames. Excuse me. Originally I did this with a couple of frames, and I changed one of them and redid it to with an even clearer frame just a few months ago. These are the ones that I chose. Frame 193, which has, and I'm looking at this side of the sign. Okay, this pole. You notice how it's pretty rectangular, you've got to say. To me, it looks very rectangular, that sign. It's not sort of bent, it's not wobbly, it doesn't look like the Bothan photograph where it's just about having trouble standing up. That's a very beautiful rounded sign. Of course, these panels down the side, we've never figured out what these panels are, why there's a strip of light material there and a light material there when it's just a big piece of plyboard. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Here's frame 228, so he's panned now across, the limo's coming out, and we've got this, piece of fiction evolving back here. And the sign is now just about into the sprocket hole region where you'd expect a fair amount of pincushion pulling it this way. And it's still pretty vertical. Of course, you've got to make sure you get the backgrounds right before you can say whether it's still vertical or not. But it still doesn't seem to be, it should be twisted out of shape. A right angle should be twisted. Okay, when you do a pincushion, if you look at the edge of the pincushion frame, it comes a little point. So a right angled corner actually becomes an acute angle, a smaller than 90-degree angle, which you'd expect for the corner of the sign should be doing opposite things in these two frames. So the first step, of course, for the two frames was to get rid of the pincushion. That's not the frame, that's just the little video clip from before. And then just to make sure, which is a step I didn't do originally, I corrected the perspective so that it acted as if the camera was pointing at the exact same position for both frames, right? And this is just to remind you that we can do that. And this is to remind you we can do the pincushion distortion. And so what you should have are two frames in which the camera may as well have been glued to a tripod pointing in the same direction. Okay? The image should look the same. So people will move, and the limo will move, and the motorcycles will move, and people might even wave. Of course, none of them wave. But if they were waving, you would see them waving. But the camera is pointing in exactly the same direction. So everything should line up perfectly. If it's real. Of course, once you do all that, you still have to worry about the camera could have been rotated, and of course you've got to make sure you overlay them at the same position. And everything that's fixed, that's not moving like limousines and people, should be identical. They should stay in the same place. And so they're the two bits of frame, and you should be able to overlay them perfectly. So you notice here you've got the holes in the wall, which the bushes are quite prickly, aren't they? We measured all those holes just the other day and got prickled, whatever they've got now, holly, isn't it, or something? The holes in the wall, the top of the wall, the edge of the wall, and these bushes. Do you see that little highlight on the bush, whatever that bush is called, that reddish sort of bush? Okay, I'll believe you. I'll just call it the red bush. I'm not a botanist. And the bushes and so on. Now I'll show you a different version of this shortly, where you don't have to try and see if every single point lines up. You can just compare them. But everything should overlap, and as you see, everything comes into nice, beautiful alignment, as I'll show you in a moment. And the Stemmons freeway sign, if it's a real sign, should come into perfect alignment. And so when you bring the backgrounds into alignment, you say, what's going on here? And that's appropriate sort of expression. When this was discovered, I'm sure heads rolled when this was discovered, that there is something wrong with the Stemmons freeway sign. Let me show you, and I think it's the blunder of the century. If the film is the hoax of the century, don't worry about the shadow of the tree, because the tree sways in the breeze a little bit, and this is like a second later, 2 seconds later. But you can really pick any point that's fixed. Now you've got to worry there's some ghost image here. In fact, that's the Texas highway sign down here for the Stemmons freeway sign. But apart from the things that are coming through as ghost image, you can try and line up any of those features, this bush, or this corner, okay? And just make sure, even the shadow, make sure that they're properly rotated and overlaid. So then you can look at the sign. Now, it's flopping around. It's not just the pole of the sign, it's the edge of the sign, but not the top of the sign. Okay, so this is where the sign should be stationary. It should be a real sign in this frame, not in the raw frame as you have on the Zapruder film. to make that a bit clearer, here's a blue line going down through these two holes in the wall. Here's a blue line going through that corner of the wall where it turns around the corner, the edge of the wall, I guess. And here's a red line that's just roughly above the top of the sign, just as a horizontal reference. And these orangey yellow lines, which colour are they? Orange or yellow? I can't tell, I'm colourblind. They follow the pole and just to the right of the right edge of the sign, which in the first one, the limo's behind it, and I'm just trying to figure out where the umbrella is in the other one. It must be right down here. Umbrella comes up, I guess. Yeah, the umbrella. I never noticed there was no umbrella in the first frame that I used. You can see the angles are wrong. Now, if the sign was just moving left and right, there'd be no problem. Because if the sign was here and the background was over there, if you close one eye, or you can put your finger up in front of your head, if you move your head, your finger moves sideways. Right? Move that way, your finger moves the other way, up and down, which is called the parallax effect. You can make things move left and right and up and down. You can't make them tilt just by moving your head. You can try it at home for as many hours as you like. You can't make the angle change by moving your head. Now, so it can move left and right because Zapruder was filming, and he's apparently a real person on a real pedestal filming. Could have moved his camera because he's got to turn around and not bump Sitzman off the pedestal and so on. And that's quite possible. You can't have this angle. You can't make this angle wrong. And in fact, when you go back and look at the original frames, you realise that it was aligned perfectly with the background in the raw frames. The point about this is, this now points over here in this frame, and it points over there for that frame. But before you take the pincushion distortion out, if you just laid a ruler against them, they would point to the same position on the frame. Okay? Because pincushion distortion correction has bent vertical lines like that. So whoever created the film, or put the Stemmen sign over the top for whatever purpose, put it in the film without realising that there was this pincushion distortion that would have to be introduced or accounted for down the track. Okay? And it really is it really is, to my mind, the strongest evidence that the film was at least altered, that this sign was put over the top of whatever was there, presumably the sign as it originally was. And people have speculated about this for many years. Question is, why wasn't it fixed? And here's what I thought was fairly impressive. This issue, dated November 29, Josiah Thompson's clincher was that it was published, it was actually printed on Saturday night. The problem he had with it being printed on Saturday night is there's actually a photo in here of Ruby shooting Oswald, which would have been an amazing prediction if... but I'll admit that it was probably all printed by Sunday, because people were getting it by Tuesday morning and it was being distributed on Monday. So I'll accept that it was probably printed on the first weekend. And so if David excuses me for manhandling his copy here, these three apparently innocent frames here locked it in. There they are, scanned and reproduced over there. The mistake was it shows both sides of the sign. And in fact, there's two versions here of the left-hand side of the sign. It's basically locked in. The fact that the sign looked like this and it was so sort of square, and here again, already in those first couple of days, you have this weird panel, light panel on the side of the sign, which has no physical explanation. You can't, as Jack has pointed out many times, you can't splice together those pieces of plyboard without a metal bracket. In fact, the reason I was taking photographs of the sign that's there now down at Fort Worth Turnpike sign is because it has a lot of these metal brackets on the back that's splicing pieces of wood together when we notice the little rain sensor up on the corner. So that's locked in. That's why it wasn't fixed. That's why it wasn't changed. Once you've locked something in, once you've distributed millions of copies of Life magazine, that's it. What appears in here is basically it. Anything in here can't be changed, so you better make sure what is in here is correct. And I hate to be the person that made that mistake. You can also compare it with that 1963 panorama. And here it is. This is the Zapruder panorama, a little bit bigger version of it. You can see I've now taken away the other one, which I'll show you in a moment. And you can see how all of these ghost images come together. There's a bit of grass, there's a bit of grass. There's a bit of that building up there. There's the top of that concrete thing. The windows. There's some more windows. So beautiful. Technically, it was all those ghost panels, after you take everything into account. Beautifully correct. Here's the sign. The first thing you notice about the sign is that my magical programs for giving you this seamless panorama failed for the sign simply because it was in two different places at two different times. In different frames, it's in different positions, and that's why this is the only place in the whole panorama that I fail. And here, and the edge. It's blurry because it doesn't match, even though it's got a program in there to try and smoothly blend. You can see it's tried its trickery here, and it's not convincing because the sign is not in the same place in two different frames. If you compare that to the 1963 panorama without the Zapruder overlay, you can see here the top of the windows, the holes in the wall, these holes in the wall. In fact, the whole panorama matches up to this accuracy. These signs, this lamp pole, these signs, even the grass in the thing, and you can't see the curb, and this curb, and the tree, and the bushes, what you can see of them, because it's only 5 days later, so they still look the same, basically. And there's one thing flashing out at you, which is this sign. In this one, it angles down slightly. Why is that? Because Zapruder's looking down on the sign, and the sign is facing the road. These signs, they're not exactly perpendicular to the road, they're angled to the road so drivers coming down the street can see the sign. That's usually the reason why you put a street sign next to the street. This sign looks like it's, here's the road, and the sign's sort of at a 45-degree angle. You'd almost have to get past the sign to see what's on it. It's also too wide. This sign, when you measure it, you can use photogrammetry, I guess you could call it. I'd never used that word until Jack told me the story. You can measure the sign, and it's 8 foot by 4 foot. And I did that after Jack had already said, well, these pieces of plyboard are 8 foot by 4 foot. This one, the genuine one, comes out to be 8 foot by 4 foot when you do all of the three-dimensional trigonometry, which you don't really want to do. If you had enough trouble with two-dimensional trigonometry at school, you really don't want to start tackling three-dimensional trigonometry. But you can do it, figure out what angle it's on, and it comes out to be 8 foot by 4 foot. It looks like a genuine piece of sign. This one is too wide, slightly in the wrong position, but you can get that from parallax. And it's too wide, and the top of the sign is wrong. So this completes the work that Jack had done already in showing that this sign is in the wrong position and the wrong geometry. The sign is not correct. There is a bit of a catch, and someone did point out the other day, or a couple of weeks ago, I don't have any clearer version of this photo, but maybe it looks like there is some digging around the bottom of this sign. Maybe they put a new sign in. However, at the Conspiracy Museum in Dallas, they have a huge photograph that someone donated, which shows the Stebbins sign. It's taken from just over here somewhere. I don't know. Taken the day after the assassination, I believe, and it doesn't seem to be any piles of dirt on the ground. So maybe this is just a bit of an artifact. The argument goes, there are many stories about this Stebbins sign, about that it was moved, it was taken out, it was put back up again by the FBI and taken down, and someone else put it up. Then they got rid of it altogether. I think those stories were all generated because the sign is just wrong. We don't have to compare it to the panorama to know that the sign is wrong. The sign is internally wrong in the film. In two different frames of the film, the sign does not appear the same. Okay, it's not the same sign. So we don't need to do the comparison. But this story of the sign always being moved and so on, I think some details of that were added in to confuse the issue that the sign was clearly wrong. The other comment, of course, if these are piles of dirt, where are the piles corresponding to where it was before it was rotated? What do other films say? And I'll say something about that in a moment. An interesting suggestion that someone made to me, I won't mention who it was at the time, but apparently there's some question that the sign even existed at the time of the assassination, which I thought was pretty bizarre because you see it in so many photographs. So I actually went through Grodin's book, and page after page I noticed how many photographs failed to see the sign just on this side or just on that side, just on that side. And there's maybe 6 or 8 or 10 photos which show the sign. Many photos just miss the sign. I said, well, that's a little bit strange. And just a little while ago I thought I'd check this out. How would you know if there was a sign in Dealey Plaza before the assassination? Well, a long time ago I asked Gary Mack, I said, are there any photographs before the assassination showing the Stemmen sign? And he gave me the phone number of the Dallas Parks Authority or something and said, call them up yourself. So I wasn't sure, but then it struck me just recently that the one person who would know whether there was a sign there was the guy who had to mow the lawn around the sign every day. Hudson, the groundskeeper. I think 6 years he was working there, and I guess when you mow the lawn around things every day, you know where everything is. And so I had a look at what he had to say. Talking about the signs here. How do you pronounce this guy's name? Liebler?
Oh, Liebler.
Liebler? Don't know how to pronounce it. I've only read these things. Okay, there were 2 signs. One was right along and the other one further up. He's having trouble finding the signs in these photographs because they're trying to explain where everything is. They have moved that R.L. Thornton freeway sign and put up a Stemmen sign. They have moved it? Yes, sir. And that was the end of the... didn't go any further than that. On another topic. The guy that worked there for 6 years before the assassination said they put up a Stemmen sign since the assassination. That's pretty bizarre. And they moved the other sign. Presumably this guy knows which sign he's talking about. He'd had to look at the damn sign for the last 6 years, mowing the lawn and weeding the flowers and so on.
But it's in Willis Park, right?
Yeah, there's a number of photographs which show it. There's many. There's Bond photos, Bronson, there's Willis, Betzner, there's Bothan is the famous. Bothan shows the really wonky looking sign, which I think was to explain the fact that the distortion was wrong. Which would solve some problems until you take it this far. Of course, that was when you do it. If you know how to do it, you can avoid even having to use Bothan. Well, the question was the Stemmen sign actually moved before the Dallas Police Department took their photo? Now, I posted some analysis. In fact, I mentioned some of this on Black Op Radio last September. It's a difficult thing to do because you've got to take a number of photographs and use the maps, figure out where everyone was, and do this horrible three-dimensional trigonometry. But the Bronson slide, which doesn't show that wonky-looking sign that you see in Bothan, nice, beautiful-looking side on, and you can figure out where Bronson was. If you don't believe it, you can align this and check the line of sight. And he was standing on that pedestal on the other side of Main Street. That tells you which way the sign was pointed. Because if it was pointed any other way, you would have seen more than just the side of it. You would have seen the actual, some width to it. And that tends to agree with the Dallas Police Department photo. You put that information with the DPD photo and the sign comes out to be the right dimensions. The Betzner photo, there's a supposed Zapruder looking at the back of the Betzner photo, and you figure out where Betzner is and you do the calculations. Again, a little short of, this came out to be a little short of 8 feet wide, but pretty close. There's uncertainties with doing this because there's so many parameters involved. And Willis photo, again, you figure out where Willis is, you work out the sign, and even the angles of these signs seem to be consistent with the Dallas Police Department photograph. These are apparently taken during the assassination, although I don't trust any of them. I'm sure some of them are genuine, but I'm not sure which ones. But let's assume they are genuine. They agree with the Dallas Police Department photo, which tends to suggest that the sign was still in the same place 5 days later that it was, or 3 days later, as it was at the time of the assassination. If some of these or all of these are genuine, Zapruder is the odd man out. The sign is 8.5 feet wide, maybe explaining these panels down the side, because it's too wide for the pieces of plywood they use to make their signs. But as I said, this is not, the proof involves many different measurements, and it's hard to show it to you other than telling you it works out. It's not as clear as what I've shown you before.
John, look at this data.
Yep.
Looking at the best mirror, it looks like the sign's at a weird angle.
Yeah, you've got to...
And didn't Hudson say that it was the Thornton sign that they took down and put up the standard?
No, he said they moved the Thornton sign. I'll go back to it.
Remember, he's testifying in May, or June, or July. He's our early summer witness in July.
So this could have happened in the meantime.
Oh, yeah, because the legal was all upset the fact they're not going to deal as a witness. If he gets permission from Redmond to go down there in the summer, and that's when he does it.
Compare the Bettner with the Willis. They're just not on a parallel. I mean, look how much different it is.
They don't look right, but...
The Stemmons is deeply sloped. The Willis is almost...
Yeah, the photos, the rotation of the backgrounds, I don't know if it's exactly right, but also Betzner is a little bit further up the street, isn't he, than Willis? Just a little bit further up the street. He's looking at it more square on, whereas...
I agree with all that, but still, it just looks like too much of a slope.
Yeah, it looks like it. When I measured it and did the trigonometry, it seemed to come out within errors. It seemed to be consistent, and also consistent with the Dallas Police Department photograph.
I'm throwing a question at you about this idea that everything fits really positive. It's appropriate right now. Okay. You go back to that thing we did that beautiful superposition of the Z films into really positive. And you said so everything fits. Okay. Okay. Yeah. That and even a wider angle lens, but that's fine. That's good enough.
Well, everything fits except what I'm going to speak about here, but okay, yeah.
Okay. There are 2 points I want to make, and one of them is very dear to my heart because I did work on the optical printer, but I'll go wherever the evidence leads. And the other one is, let me start with the psychological point. From 20 and 30 years ago, when we first examined this film, one of the odd things about Zupruder is he's centered right and left, but he's almost missing the action because it's down in the frame line. And it's always been my impression that that film is reframed. When you look at your thing, I mean, this is not a mathematical question. Don't you find it odd psychologically that this man who's centering things right and left is almost losing the action at the bottom of the frame line?
Oh, absolutely.
That's number one, a real oddity to this guy with all this experience, and he's doing everything nice right and left, and he can't get it correct up and down. He's not centering, number one. And the second thing is, I worked for a week, and it was either 1990 or 91, with the stuff like this tomorrow morning, with the Zapruder film on an very optical printer. And I'm telling you that between 315 and 320, everything goes off the scale. I have to reset the vertical. I have to reset the horizontal. It is so obvious on the optical printer that something's wrong. And my statement to Fetzer and to anybody else is to issue a public call. I told this to Willie Zabata during the ARB. You take the Zapruder camera, go up there on the pedestal, and film the full telephoto, and you can have me with this. I'll eat my hat if you get frames that are not beyond full zoom, because I had the experience repeatedly in the lab in New York. I had to change right and left. I had to change. Something's going on between about 360 and 30. It jumps. I have to bring it back into.
But are you sure you're not getting fooled by the pincushion distortion? Because as things sweep into the pin...
It's not 3%. We're talking about now.
No, the actual magnification of objects is not 3%. You've got to take the derivative. I was talking to David about it on the way back from lunch. You've got to actually take the derivative, and it's 3 times as large. So it's 10% magnification of small objects when you get to the corner, and when you get into the sprocket hole area, we're talking more than 10, 20%. Sorry?
No, right about at the center of the film.
But how are you comparing frames if you're not comparing one in the center with one when it's moving on?
Well, and second of all, the other thing is I'm using the Weitzman print. I'm using Weitzman's things made directly from the original. I'm using Weitzman's internegative. So I'm at a 35 millimeter machine, and I'm having to read this thing in reverse, and I made 600 feet of film, which is brand new and everything. They have blow-ups, all kinds of things on it. And there I am. And when I hit this point, I had a constant. Finally, they said to me, because I said, no, Senator, do this. I said, let's operate the machine yourself. They got ticked off with me all these instructions. I ended up operating the Oxbury for a couple of days, or 3 days. And I just think that I know you've done the mathematics, and I know you're dealing with different sources for this, But I just tell you that if you take the stuff that this government paid $18 million for and put it on an Oxbury optical printer, I'd be astonished. I mean, I don't know the role your mathematics has played in making this look smoother than the experience I had, because I empirically had this experience and have been wild about it ever since 1991 when it happened. I mean,
Now remember, MPI stabilized the film and did various things in creating the digital image. I even talked to the guy who did it, and I said, did you realize he was actually taking out jiggles that were evidentially important and contained no knowledge whatsoever?
But that was
evidentially significant.
But that was for the most tightly zoomed ones. They were trying to Grodenscope, I guess, for the tightly zoomed images. The ones that show the full sprocket holes, they didn't do that. In fact, one of the mistakes they made, apparently, according to one source, is that they didn't have the registration very well at all, and they had to get someone to come in and fix the rotation and get all the frames in the right position for each one they published, because they didn't have them all in the same position.
Jim just spoke a mouthful. He just said that these things are of evidentiary importance, and I agree with him.
Yeah, but
when I created, I mean, I brought one of these little things, but I mean, I have rolls of this stuff. When I was on that machine, I understand mathematically that you can clean this up, and I understand that NPI...
Oh, no, it's not cleaning up. And the frames you get on the MPI agree with what you get in the...
What I'm saying is that what he's got in New York City in 1967, he's got the 8mm original. Life magazine hires him and says, we want to go up to 35. We're talking about the legitimate part of Life magazine now, the guys at 67 who want to make a buck and maybe sell rights or whatever. So they hire Mo Weitzman, and he says, well, you know, there's no, with all due respect to David Healy, he says, I don't have there's no optical printer that goes 8 to 35, I'll have to build a shuttle. So he designs a little shuttle, he goes to the machine shop and he designs a shuttle. So now we've got this piece of evidence, as Jim says, it's the original evidence. He goes 8 to 35. Then tomorrow I'll discuss the craziness that occurs with Grodin, who's like a kleptomaniac and all this stuff. But one copy escapes, and my friend in New York gets this copy. And I say, I want it. He won't let me have it. He's afraid of the lawsuit. So he hires a lab and puts it on the shelf at the lab with a letter of permission, so I can use this for a week. I create footage. And I'm having this experience with what is basically a copy of what this government calls the evidence. So I love the imagery, and I love the blow-ups, and I love the clarity, and all the stuff with the mathematics and the algorithms that correct for this and that and the other thing. But on the evidence as it exists, then at Life magazine, later at the National Archives, and later at now at the Sixth Floor Museum, this is the experience I had with a machine that has perfect registration, or at least as perfect as an Oxbury can be.
Well, I mean, we can compare what you've got to the frames that I was using, but we can compare what you've got and make sure the frames agree.
The registration is going to tell the story, I think.
But if each frame is identical to to within the blurriness of the MPI images, if it's the same frames, then I'm telling you that the mathematics, when you take into account the distortion, you don't have these problems. You're talking about the background blowing up and getting bigger and bigger because you've got to magnify it more each time?
I'll tell you what I think. I think when you take the Zapruder camera, and I spoke to Rolly Zapata about this because there's a big argument I'll talk about tomorrow. Why didn't the ARRB do this? I have a whole story to tell about that, but they didn't do it. And he said, David, you don't even need Kodachrome film. Just use Ektachrome. Ektachrome, when they were measuring the property of the lens, you put Ektachrome in there, and you run the whole thing through.
You've done that, haven't you, Rick? Oh, sorry, you're listening to something else. Yeah, I mean, they've taken films. Scott's taken films, Rick's taken films.
With Ektachrome through the Zapruder camera at full zoom.
Yeah.
David,
yeah.
Well, we should talk to him.
John, just one point before it gets lost and before you proceed. You said in creating this, they had to sort of stabilize frame by frame. Is that not right? And if that is correct, isn't that an indication that the film was put together frame by frame rather than shot continuously?
Sorry, MPI you're talking about?
Yeah.
No, MPI just did a terrible job. They just photographed.
Describing kind of wobble frame from frame that they had to adjust.
No, it's just like.
In there to fix it.
Well, this is the story I'm told, that they had each... Okay, here's the frame and the sprocket holes, right? Well, the sprocket holes on this side. And what they basically did when they scanned it, it was almost like giving it to your kid to just go and scan on your home scanner. Sometimes it was here, sometimes it was here, sometimes it was here, sometimes it was here. Not that, that's a little bit exaggerated, but basically they didn't make sure that the same...
It was in their copy, it wasn't in the original, it was in their copy. Is that what you think?
Well, they got the original film, and...
Is it an exact copy and that those features were in the original? Because that would suggest...
No, but the whole frame was moved. But to put it on the screen, you want to have it in the same position each frame. Even so, the version I showed you at the start of the film, I had to write a program to look for the edge of the sprocket holes because they still didn't register it exactly right. Maybe they didn't have to fix it up, but I tell you that when you look at the MPI copies, it looks like they have resized it and rotated it because the edges are so blurry. Even the digital edges are blurry, which means they've done so many things to it and it ends up being the wrong size anyway.
How can you tell the difference? I'm just curious between the resizing done by MPI and the resizing that we suspect is done on an optical printer.
No, I'm not talking about frame by frame resizing. I'm talking about all of the frames were in one format and then they changed it to something else and they changed it to something else and they rotated them, and the quality of the MPI images is inferior to what you've got, what Groden even puts out. It's inferior. The argument is they're very incompetent in that whole project. I mean, oh yeah. But the argument about MPI, the official argument, why they skip frames, why it's so blurry, why they didn't give us, why no one can give us the full scan of all of the frame, so we can have a look at some of these bystanders, so we can have a look at Greer's head turn at full zoom. In fact, I'll relate a very interesting story. I told you I started off trying to de-blur these frames. And on the internet I found one expert in, I won't name him, but there was a person who appeared to be an expert in image processing who had written textbooks. And I sent him an email and I said, look, I was working on this de-blurring in position space and it's a new method. What do you think? And he says, oh yeah, there's a couple of methods and that sounds like it might work. You know, how does it compare? And I'd mentioned I'm using the Zapruder films as a test case. Go to this website and have a look. And he said, I don't know why you're doing the Zapruder frames because all of them have been de-blurred anyway. And I said, what do you mean? They haven't been de-blurred. We're talking about de-blurring, actually getting rid of the blur in each particular frame, so each one of them is sharp. And he said, oh yeah, they've been done. And I'd mentioned the MPI project. And he says, oh yeah, I had to come in at the last moment on that and bail them out because they stuffed it up with the registration. They didn't have the registration right. And in fact, he said, I've got a copy of the full digital scans of each frame locked in a vault. And I did a double take and said, you've got the full digital scans, can we get hold of them? Oh, no, commercial confidentiality, I can't do anything more about that. So I wrote to Gary Mack and said, look, this guy says he's got the, I named the guy to Gary and I said, he says he's got the full digital scans and maybe researchers would be able to use them. This is before I dealt much with Gary Mack. And Gary Mack just sort of said, oh yeah, it's interesting. Probably rang the guy and says,
zealous pursuer of truth that he was.
The next email, the guy said, look, I don't want to talk about this anymore, it's confidential. And I contacted him out of the blue off the internet.
So you said Gary, basically implying that Gary told him to keep your mouth shut?
Oh no, but I think this guy just started getting worried about what I was implying, that he should make them available.
Oh.
He might have thought I was a university worker or something on the correct side of the fence. In the know, maybe. And very bizarre. You want me to get back to land?
Go for it, yes.
The argument about the sign being moved, dug out and moved and put back in and whatever, and the groundskeeper might be talking about some later event, sounds fair enough. If the sign on the day of the assassination does not match the sign a few days later because they moved the sign, it's a possible argument. So you can't use that, as I have used that, as the primary evidence for things being wrong. Question then is, what about this this lamp pole over here? This is the Zapruder film, the Zapruder panorama. So you see all these versions of the limousine and the wall in the background, and it's all seamless because it all fits together. We'll discuss it. You think it doesn't fit together, but from my point of view, it all fits together. So here's this pole, and it's in fact even seen on. It's great to have these here. It's even seen on. The pole's even seen on this. It makes a very starring role in Life magazine. I guess I should take it out. So you can see here, we're going to focus on those. The pole makes a bit of a starring role, and in fact, if you look at it on the Zapruder frames, it tends to actually bend the other way. Now, if you compare the lamp pole between the two panoramas, apart from the possible parallax shift, so if Zapruder moved his head, the pole can move sideways, but it can't change angle, it should line up. So if you do that, it is a little bit to the left of where it was 5 days later, I don't know what this black thing is around. I don't know if it's a black armband or something on the...
Well, there's another anomaly. If you look closely at the whole, the color version there, just
Yep.
for a second. Up and up, yeah.
Down.
Look at the globe with the bulb, okay? You see the lawn at the top where it meets the globe on the right there, right here. Now go to the left of the bulb, and you'll see that you have kind of a discontinuity from where the lawn line hits the bulb on the left and the lawn line emerges from the bulb on the right of the globe. And you can hypothesize about it, but I just want to point it out.
Shadows and bushes and...
Yeah.
I didn't look. Yeah.
You should.
Yeah, well, but when it gets to the edge of the lawn and the bushes, you've got an uncertainty. You haven't got something like a straight line, which is demonstrably straight. You've got something.
I understand, but it's suspiciously curvy to the right of the
Yeah.
It reminds me of David Healy's talk about where the idea of that line.
Yeah. Well, this is one of those suspicious things.
Yeah.
I mean, this pole just didn't look right to me before I even did what I'm showing you here. But if you it's a bit harder to tell because it is to the left of where you'd expect it to be, which you can explain with parallax. But if you look at it for long enough, and in fact if you put them over the top of each other, you realise that this one is leaning a little bit to the right. There's a Zapruder Film lamp pole leans a little bit to the right. Now this panorama has been set up so that vertical is vertical. Okay, so according to the Dallas Police Department, that lamp pole was pretty well exactly vertical, even without the washers that they put in for Jack's benefit. This other one leans a bit, so I think I've got some lines on there just to make it a little bit easier to see. Okay, I don't know if you can see the angle there. They could be in different positions, but they should be on exactly the same angle. So if it's leaning in 5 days' time, it should be leaning on the day of the assassination. If it's straight on in 5 days after the assassination, it should be straight on the day of the assassination. Now, as far as I know, no researchers or so-called researchers have argued that they broke the lamp pole out of the concrete and moved it within 5 days of the assassination. Jack wasn't even in Dealey Plaza within 5 days of the assassination. There's no reason to move it and change the angle by... that's impossible. So you might argue about the sign being moved and there's holes in the ground and there's stories of it being moved. Why is this the wrong angle? So again, you compare it to real life. This is sort of like secondary evidence that something is definitely wrong with the stem and sign and the lamp pole. It's about 1.5 degrees, which is not a huge amount, but it's not insignificant. I mean, these panoramas, as I said, are fairly accurate to... well, it wouldn't be fair to compare the angle for that, but the registration we have between the panorama and real life is quite accurate. Let me keep zipping along. In my opinion, at least, I think that what I've shown tells us that without doubt the extant film has been altered. The stem and sign's been plastered on there without much thought about the pincushion distortion. The lamp pole, both of them, if you like, foreground objects. Objects in front of the limo, in front of the background, in terms of David Healy's editing scenario. So you can understand why those two sets of objects are quite difficult, because the two things that stick up above the limo and above the background. You've got to get them all right. So that layer seems to be incorrect. Yeah, I said that. New lamp pole on the wrong angle. And I would say this is excessive haste for the images that were prepared for that first weekend publication in the Life issue that's dated November 29, but was available some days earlier. It's a mistake. It's a blunder, or mistakes. A couple of weeks later, now, you're saying this is December 2?
What?
The Memorial edition.
Well, it's November 29th.
Yeah. November 29th is the very first one, which has very poor quality black and white images. You can actually come and have a look at them, anyone afterwards. They are terrible quality. You can't see people's faces or anything. You can see the stem and sign beautifully, those panels down the side, but you can't see expressions on the President's face or Jackie's face, because it just goes from black to white. It's like it looks like a 6th generation copy or something. It's terrible. And in fact, someone emailed me the front page of a Chicago newspaper from the Monday after the assassination, which has one of the exact same images with the exact same poor quality, large on the front page. Yeah, the same as one of those. So
Number 25 they're carrying as a blue film?
one frame, and it looked like
film was not made available to the press until January 28th.
Well, I'll dig that out afterwards because I've got it on my laptop.
There's a big story that runs about it, and it's published on the first, on May 28th or 29th.
Not even the...
It's obvious, John, that they're giving the poor quality so they don't compromise their flexibility in the way.
Oh, yeah.
they make things come.
Oh, I'll come to that. Now, this memorial edition, which is really, and some people think, in fact, it's been sometimes quoted, in fact, you quote the article by Paul Mandel as being in that one, but it's in this one.
Correct. Oh, that's what.
Yeah, so you've got to fix that best evidence. It's just got that little... It's like on page 10,057 or something, as a footnote. Second best evidence. No, it's really, I've got the whole, it's fantastic. This is a weird edition, I've got to say, for a start. You want that out of the plastic? It has the, you can recognise it because it has the cut down version of the same portrait. It is completely to do with the assassination, no advertisements or anything. And I believed it was taken from that first edition material plus what was in, well, there must have been one a week after that because there was one that showed the funeral, was there? Or was that just in this? But that doesn't show the funeral. That stops at Ruby shooting Oswald. Doesn't show any of the funeral, which is why it was probably published on the Sunday. This one comes out with all the funeral stuff and a lot of stuff in there, and colour images. Now, it's very hard to refer to things in this in this edition because there are no page numbers and there's no date. And I only even was sure it was 1963 because it was copyright 1963 Time Incorporated.
It's been reissued a number of times.
It's been reissued, but I think I got the original. I think David's is the original. Yeah, and I've got one which has got the original postage sticker, I think. Very strange. No date and no page numbers. I said 2 weeks later. I suspected there was one after the week after and one the week after that, so I was thinking December 13. We can look at that. Now again, I had a very nice image scanned in, and I should be able to just show you live one of the in fact two of the, I don't want to damage this. This one's pretty clear, and this one's very clear. In fact, yes. Thank you, David. Just as a digression, I hope I'm going to go over time now. This.
You have a half hour max to talk with me a couple of questions.
Okay. I'm just going to go out of shot for a moment, David. Look familiar? This film strip shown on the front of the MPI image of an assassination that looks like the film strip of the original film. I saw it in the Conspiracy Museum the other day, or the 6th floor museum, and I thought I've seen that image just very recently. And in fact, that is not frames of the film. That's the same image repeated over and over, and it's not even MPI's image. It's the Life magazine image. So MPI did such a poor job they didn't even put their own version on the front cover of their own DVD and video. They repeated the Life image 4 times as if it was a film strip because it's the only good image you can get. You want a clear image, you don't go to MPI, you go back to Life magazine, if you can still find them. They're quite expensive, so I want to be careful with these. That one is the other very clear one. That's why I was very glad that David brought it along, because that's on the cover. This one is the one I'm actually going to talk about right now, which you can see up on the screen. It comes out a little bit, well, a little bit more colourful when you look at it like that. The one on the front cover of the MPI is like this one. It's an amazingly good frame, remarkably good frame. In fact, impossibly good frame, because everything is sharp. Everything is sharp. Sharp? Sharp. Okay, I can't say it with an American accent, I'm afraid. It's sharp. Everything, you're going to have to get used to the accent. Everything is in focus. And as is the other image, which appears on the front cover because it's so good. These little point light highlight, we saw them before when we did the sign overlay, and you saw that little block, that little point in the bushes, I don't know, flower or bud or overlaid. There's a lot of those little blop, 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 blops, whatever they are. I don't really care what they are, but they're there. You can see them in many frames. And look at this sharpness. In fact, that's, you know, this is the beginning of the story of what actually happened. There, look. And looking at him, and this is, and this guy with his doing that. At the other frames it changes to a wave actually, but the first version that was published, it was a V. Or a 2. Well, I don't know. Is it Winston Churchill or something? I don't know. That's.
What do you think the guy is doing?
I don't know. I don't really care what he's doing, but it's just interesting that in this one image it looks like he's putting a V up. If he's a, is he a signal man? I don't know if is he the signal man or one of the signal men? Anyway. Yeah, well, it's a V. V means something. I don't know. Five more shots. Roman numerals. 5 more shots, please. Yeah.
Yeah, the second ball.
That's not the point of this frame. Right. This sharp, beautiful, fantastic for publication. I can see why Life chose this frame, because these guys, see the guy looking up the street and his mate looking up the street, and he's in the process of going, oh, where's the president? Look at the weird. And this beautiful. Impossibly beautiful. Well, I'll show you in a moment. You have to take a little bit of my word for it, but the limo travels this distance during the exposure of this frame. The limo travels this distance, and I'll show you. I won't just state that to you, I'll demonstrate it to you. This is a real spot in the bush because you see it in a number of frames. It's not just a bit of speck of dust in Life magazine. This is a real spot in the limo, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But apart from that, there are so many sharp, I mean, you look at this, you can examine it right there afterwards. Well, flag can wave, so it could be going backwards at the same velocity the car's going forward, so I wouldn't like to take the flag. But things that are fixed to the limo or the motorcycle, look at that sharpness there, look at the tree, the edge, it's all, I don't know, does that tree have those sort of leaves? I mean, if they're real leaves, I mean, that's amazingly sharp. But that point and that point, of course, if the limo travels that much during the exposure, well, you can either stand there with your camera and the limo will be blurred by that much. Everything should be blurred by that much. That should be blurred by that much, blurred. That'll be a line. That'll have blurred. That'll have tails on it, like a comet. Even the edge of the umbrella. There's the umbrella man. There he is.
But he is a panderer or something.
Well, no, hang on. There's a few possibilities. If you stand stationary, the limo will be blurred. If you pan perfectly with the limousine, he will be sharp. This guy will be blurred. That'll be blurred. That'll be blurred. These holes are a little bit blurry, so I'm not going to count those. But all the background should be blurred. All the background is not moving should be blurred by this amount. And the limousine will be sharp. If he half pans, so he pans at half the speed of the limousine will be blurred by half that amount, the background will be blurred by half that amount. If he also blurs up and down, you can get a big blur of the limousine and a big blur of the background. You can get bigger blurs. The minimum blur is this. You have to share that amount of blur between this guy and this guy. That's the laws of physics. If it's taken through Zapruder's camera. Okay? Now let's just... It'll stay up for a little while. Huh?
One flag dropped as if there's no motion or anything, and the other flag was extended. And I don't know why it's extended unless there's some wind. But anyway, I just wanted to...
No, but flags can get caught up on themselves. It's wrapped, sort of stuck. I don't know. I'm not going to use the flags. I'm going to use things that are solid objects. That's going to stay for a couple of frames anyway. Impossible. There you go. That was pretty dramatic, wasn't it?
What frame number would that be?
It's, well, I'm going to show you here. He's good. He's good. I'm saying by the Warren Commission because this was done, as David Healy said, for the Warren Commission. This whole thing was created for the Warren Commission. This is basically, the middle frames of the film were locked in by the time they put their exhibits out. And presumably they saw it, or some version of it, in February '64. So this is what I'm going to call that. This is actually from the MPI disc. You can actually notice it's not as clear as what I just showed you. You know, you want clear photos. For the front cover of the MPI video, you go to Life magazine. Here's some little, it's 231, 232, 233. So I'm showing you 231, 2, 3, 2, 1. And I've just rotated them and moved them so that the background is the tree and the bushes and the holes and everything is all. I didn't even do a perspective. The perspective is so small to correct. No, I'll come to that. Just hold your horses. Okay. Not going to be stable enough for that. Let's all right. I put my finger sort of on the edge of the wheel in the middle frame, 232, which is the one we're looking at. And you can see there how much the edge of the wheel moves in one frame, that much. There's a Zapruder camera, and I want to open it up so I can verify. When you look at the way it works, it's about 45% of each frame period the camera's open for. So it's just less than half. That's that amount that I showed you before here, which is half of that movement from frame to frame. So in one frame period, the limo moves from here to here. Each exposure is open for 45% of the time. 55% of the time, the shutter's closed. Okay? I'm saying that's a real spot in the bush. You can, in fact, if you've got better copies of the frames, you'll verify that this is a real spot in the bush, according to the frames that we have. And I'm saying that's a real spot on the limo. It's not just a piece of dirt. The bush I saw in various frames. The spot on the limo I was worried about because it was less clear in the MPI frames. Again, MPI, worse quality. And being a car, if it was a reflection of something else, I couldn't use the motion of the car as being the motion of the reflection. It would be the motion of the reflected object that would be relevant, a bit of a physics technicality. So I thought to myself, what could I... There must be some other photo showing me that spot on the side of the car. And I was looking at my bookshelf and looking at the books and trying to figure out where can I find that that spot on the side of the car. And wow, I didn't have to look too far. I just had to find the front covers of a couple of books, and the spot's there. It's probably the keyhole. I don't know if they locked the presidential limousine, but it's there. That's from the Zapruder film, but that's from something else. And that's the little advertisement that goes to, any of you who hasn't bought the books, of course you must buy the books and buy more copies of the books and give them to your friends. And there are some excellent authors in those books. Okay, so that spot is a real spot in the car. It's the keyhole, I think, whatever it is. I don't care what it is. It's keyhole? Yeah, keyhole. Bit of light humour there. How can there be no blur? Now, de-blurring is impossible in 1963. I mean, I started off de-blurring frames, so I know how hard it is. You need today's computers, which computers in 1963 were the equivalent not even of a calculator, they're equivalent of a toaster. Computers that we have in 1963. And this is very computer intensive. To de-blur some of those frames, I leave the thing running overnight, if it's large enough. So there's no possible way you can start with a blurred frame and de-blur it in 1963. All right. Now you start getting to the thought, either camera running faster or you have the limo going slower. Because the motion of the limo from 231 to 232 to 233 does not work. Okay, as you said, it's either stopped, which means you've deleted a whole lot of frames to make it look like it's moving, or, how do I say that? This is the problem though. my first project was to do the blurring. And so I know how much blur there is, and in fact there was another researcher that had done a study of the blur in each frame and trying to match it up between frames and in each frame as to Zapruder's tracking error. And so I know inside out how much blur there is in each frame, and 99.9% of the time, or maybe 99% of the time maybe, all the frames have the correct blurring, including, who mentioned it? Did you mention it? You mentioned it, 302 and 303. I'm working off the MPI copies, and if I got your copies, I may well find that 302 and 303 are incorrect. That's one reason for having MPI so blurry, so we can't do those sort of measurements. Okay? But within tolerances, within uncertainties, scientific uncertainty if you like, 302 and 303 are consistent, because in one of them he's panning too fast, so the limo's a little bit blurred and the background's a lot blurred. In the other one he's panning a little bit too slow, so the limo's blurred that way and the background's blurred a little bit that way, which looks sharp, because there's no sharp objects on Mary Moorman and Jean Hill. It's the sharpest frame of them we have, but it's still a little bit blurred. But if I get a sharper one, like if you find an old copy of Life magazine, you find out what it was before MPI got their hands on it and did so much to it that it was useless in terms of evidence. The MPI version is useless.
Well, the lifting frames might be different.
Yeah, well, but most of the other frames are correct. Okay, you pick 100 frames, they'll all be correct. Most objects in most frames. There's 486 frames with a whole heap of objects in there, and I haven't analysed every single object in every single frame, because I'd be as old as Jack if I'd done all that before I came and spoke to you. But, sorry Jack. Is that ageist or something? Discriminatory? You can't check everything, but everyone I've checked works out perfectly for Zapruder's camera. The motion of the limo in one frame, take 45% of that, and the blurs add up to that. In fact, as vectors, like Weatherly's blur analysis, vector analysis, he didn't do it right because he was making assumptions about what was between the frames, which you can't do, because the Nyquist frequency's high enough, you can move between frames. But within one frame, as vectors, the blurs always add up as vectors within one frame, 99% of the time. Right? That's a bit of mathematically describing here what was going on, but all of the frames mathematically are perfect. Now, the frames we have now. So you have this idea. If frame 232 from Life were obtained by frame deletion, most of the other ones would need to have the blur introduced into them. Right? It's all well and good to say that the camera is running at 48 frames per second, and even at 48 I think it's still not blurry enough, but if it was 48 frames per second, you've deleted every other frame, or it was moving a lot slower and you've deleted frames, then you've got to put the blur back into the other 485 frames. How hard is it to introduce blur? Well, you can probably blur them, can't you? Just sort of jiggle it around while you're rephotographing it. The moving objects and the stationary objects have to be separately cut out. David Healy's just told you exactly how you do that. You mask them out. You can do it, no problems. You cut out the moving objects, you cut out the stationary objects, you blur each of them. So when you're exposing it, now I'm thinking not so much here in terms of film optical printers, but in terms of just normal photographic equipment, you just have a little wheel which moves it along a little bit, and as you're exposing, you do a long exposure, a low intensity long exposure, you wheel it along as you do it. You get a blur. So that's not too hard to do. Then you've got to paste them back together. David Healy explains how you paste them back together. You could do it. Except that's a lot of work for all the other frames just to say that frame 232 is a genuine frame from some original film. Right? Some original film taken with a really fast shutter speed, or things were going slower. So, but regardless, even if you did believe that, you've just proved to yourself the film was a fabrication. The film was a creation according to the techniques that David Healy was talking about. Okay? All of the frames, or most of the frames, nearly all of the frames, were created. Not just Stemenstein pasted over the top with sticky tape and it was in the wrong place. You've got to create all of these. You've got to cut out the moving bits and blur them differently. And that assumes you're starting with objects which aren't blurred to start with. So you need really high shutter speed, which starts to make you question whether you've got the Zapruder camera. So almost all, if not all, the frames are created from some raw material. And again, I wrote this before you, I knew you were coming. This, what I've shown you already establishes this fact, that you have to fabricate the whole film, one way or the other. You can't make that image real without fabricating the rest, cutting them out at least and blurring them, putting them back together with David's equipment. What I'm going to talk about now, I'm going to run through it pretty quickly, is just additional support once you start believing this. Right? Start fleshing out the details of other things that are wrong and what you can learn from it.
You're saying that the car did not stop at 2:30.
Oh, no.
You're saying it did not stop. But the fact that it's so crystal clear on the rest of it means what?
It could not have come from Zapruder's camera. Well, frames 231, 232, 233, as we have them now, did not come through Zapruder's camera. Because it violates the laws of physics.
You have to have blurring in the background or blurring in the foreground.
And since the car's not stopped, you're saying, and then since the alternative would be to do blur all over the place to rescue that.
Well, 231, 232, 233, with that image, is impossible, whatever scenario you look at, because 231, 232, 233 establishes the speed of the limousine, and Zapruder's camera is open for 45% of the time. It's not shown, so those frames did not come in that order from Zapruder's camera. I mean, that's established, that's proved. All right, I'll swear to that on a witness stand, that those 3 frames did not come through the Zapruder camera in that order, one after the other. It's impossible.
Yeah. If the shutter opening on the Zapruder camera is a little more than 50%, say, would that have any effect on your...
If it was more than 50, if it was open for more than 50% of the time, it should be blurred even more.
Okay, because I believe it is.
Open for more than 50% of the time.
Yeah, it's a larger opening than just 45%.
Right, where did you get the 45%?
It works out a bit. There's an angle of the opening in the rotating... that's from the Zapruder report.
No, actually, in the Zapruder report, I believe it is, he states that it's, in fact, he even has a picture of it in there, where it's just a bit more than half the time.
Open more than half the time? Well,
that just makes your argument
well,
stronger. You say,
oh yeah, this makes this argument stronger. Makes this argument stronger and makes all the rest of the blurring in the film even that. In fact, it would make 302 and 303 probably off the edge of... I have to have a look at that. Well, I'm going to pull the thing apart as soon as you're not watching. But 45, 55% to this level of accuracy doesn't really matter, but it makes this one stronger. Oh, so I've stuffed it up for the last couple of years, but it's about half.
Yeah, rough.
All right, save myself on that. Okay, some things which are not... Okay, well, that's it. The film is a fabrication. I could stop there and say thank you and go home, and that's it. But there's other things that you notice along the way. In these Life magazine issues, only 2 sprocket hole edges were actually ever published. One is on the frame just in between those 2 really clear ones, one on the front of the MPI and the one that's I've just shown. Tiny little sprocket edge here, which actually has a black edge to it, which is what you do get on a real piece of celluloid. Sorry, you can look at it later, but you can't even see it, and I didn't scan it. I didn't think it was going to be here. It's not that important. But the edge of that sprocket hole is almost looks like a real sprocket hole would look like, because when you get to the edge of something, you get the changing of the transparency of the celluloid. That one doesn't tell us anything. The only other sprocket hole that you see, the only other sprocket hole edge, was in the Warren report issue. Okay, by accident. In fact, it was interesting to hear someone mention C.D. Jackson before as having some sort of connections, because of course you open the Warren report issue and you don't see anything about the Warren report. You find the fact that C.D. Jackson died just before the Warren report was issued. There's the obituary on the front page. But that's not what I was mentioning it for. The other sprocket hole you see is right here. The corner of this one. And I'll show it up on the screen in a moment, so don't worry if you can't see it there. But that's the full image where you see the edge of a sprocket hole. And which version have we got here? Oh, the 313 version. I haven't got that. I'm gonna have to get that. You have to scan that for me, David, because I have the 323 version. They kept changing one of the plates in that one because 323 was a problem as well. Here it is, a scan of just the corner of that image that I just showed you out of the Life magazine, and that's a sprocket hole. I'll establish that for you in a moment. Let's assume that this is the edge of a sprocket hole, and this here is a ghost image. Remember that we've got the ghost panel sorted down. There's no problem with the ghost panels. They're supposed to be there. They are there. The ghost image is coming through from the frame afterwards. There's something bright up here, probably Main Street, in fact, shining through. There's a ghost image. And that's a highlight on a limousine, something bright. And here's the sprocket hole. And where the sprocket hole crosses the ghost image, it's not white anymore. It turns this bluey colour. So I first better establish from the MPI that it is the sprocket hole. Okay, there's the sprocket hole. There's no doubt about it. That's the sprocket hole we're talking about. That's the whole thing according to MPI. Of course, I haven't mentioned this huge forearm of Clint Hill. That's a whole separate issue. I mean, that's one forearm there. I don't know. I don't know. But that, you can worry about that one at home. This corner changes. In Life magazine, that crosses over. In the MPI one, it comes down here. But you're still left with a bit of a halo. But of course on the DVD, let's make it really dark and let's wash out the colour so you can't see it. I've actually enhanced it. I've brought the brightness back up. That's why it's a little bit grainy over here. See the lousy colour? I brought the brightness back up, brought the colour back up, and picked up some noise. And you can just barely see this halo. Okay? This halo of the hole. Let's go back to what's going on here. A hole is supposed to be a hole. Right? You can't have a blue hole. Sprocket hole, there's a blue limo, and when you get the highlights of the limo, it turns light blue, so that's the colour balance of this particular frame as has been published. What have you got here? You've got a white image of a sprocket hole exposed over the top, so no complementary mask, just a straight out sprocket hole image exposed over the top to make a sprocket hole shape. And then you have the ghost panel there as well. Now where you got the ghost panel with the sprocket hole, white plus white was enough white to make it white. Unfortunately, where the ghost, the little strip where the ghost image did not overlap with the sprocket hole image, you've got a single double, this is a triple exposure. It's blue plus white plus white. It's white enough to be white because you're adding more and more light. Here you've got just the sprocket hole image exposed plus the blue limo and you get light blue. Which is why I went to David Healy's version of the fabrication of the film. I thought you could have done it just by rephotographing through the Zapruder camera, frame by frame. Create each frame, put it up on a screen, rephotograph it, or some other mechanism to rephotograph it, and that will give you the pincushion distortion. That'll give you the ghost frames automatically. But this tells me it's not. This tells me that what David was telling me is correct. You can induce the pincushion distortion just with a couple of lenses. You can put the sprocket holes on, just expose the sprocket hole shape. And then the ghost images, well, you need the mask, which is the circular mask with the gate mask, and you put them together, you get the ghost images. So this tells me that David's version of the fabrication is correct. It probably was never photographed through the Zapruder camera, because it's actually difficult to get it, to do the blurring in the sprocket hole area. You've got to worry about the claw coming over the top. It puts a gap in the blur, and that's very hard to do with the Zapruder camera. You'd have to create that beforehand. And so That's what this thing tells you. And of course MPI tried to, I mean Gary Mack even admits that MPI edited the edges of the sprocket holes. He admits they edited the edges of the sprocket holes, I believe. That's what I think he said. Or they may have. He says, yeah, well maybe they did. Don't trust the sprocket. And that's why this is such a clean digital vertical line, I think. And they've altered this corner. See that cuts across? That's rounded.
If you look at the top, it's blurred, basically, but that is such a clean line going down.
Yeah.
Just a minor one. When you say it's not so good as camera, do you mean there's some, like you've already said it's seamless and all the rest. So what are you saying? There's another person filming from Zapruder's position?
I'll get to that. I'm probably running out of time. So sprocket hole is really double exposure. This white thing originally was put over the top. Oh, I've got to go back a step actually. Talk about that in a second. The sprocket hole idea matches in with something David Mantic published, an observation in Assassination Science. And this is one example where it all pulls together. You've got to rely on everything that's come before. You noticed all the, David, you noticed all the halos on the sprocket holes in the Zapruder film? It's probably because they had, they'd already put, they thought they never had a need for a real piece of film. All they needed was things that looked like it was a real piece of film. They had all these images, frame by frame, prepared for the Warren Commission to publish in their report. You know, they built transparencies, slides. And then eventually someone says, hey, we're going to need a piece of film. We're going to have to shrink this down into a film because bloody Garrison wants to subpoena it or some other reason. We need a piece of film. So then they had to shrink it down and they didn't exactly register the holes properly, just a little bit out. And so you get these halos. Bogus, I'm going to try and run through this really quick. The bogus wound to the head, here's a number of frames. They just happen to have nothing in the background, which is why I chose them. And you see the spray. And then this big crater. These are all aligned so that little handle thing is in the same spot and the rotation's fixed. And it's not de-blurred, but it's sort of Grodin scoped if you want to listen to Grodin. And there's a thing and the thing slurps up his head. And just so you can see what it actually looks like, the blob slurping up his head as you go through the film, you know, it changes. That's the changing here. You can see it actually sliding up his head. If you look at it live, where's the red spray? The red spray that was introduced in one version of this version, David Mantic's version of the Warren report thing, the one that had 313, introduced the red spray, and maybe they thought that's the mistake. We don't really want that red one in there. Get rid of it, but it was too late. You don't see any red spray. And why? Because only in one frame. You get a bit of grey, which disappears very quickly. It's almost like a special effect. You can measure the amount of red, green and blue in each of those frames according to frame number. 313, it shoots up. Red plus green plus blue gives you white or grey. Red plus green plus blue lasts for about 4 or 5 frames. Where does it go? Maybe it blows away, I'm not sure. It can't fall out even if you dropped a lead ball from his head. In fact, particularly the red. The red disappears straight away and this just leaves you with grey. This is supposed to be blood. It's not supposed to be special effects. They do special effects for a movie. It's an explosion. It's an ignition. Once the ignition's gone, the explosion goes away. This is blood. It doesn't go away. It stays red. Blood stays red until it disappears. If you drop the lead ball from his head, it will take about 6 frames to even fall into the limousine. So it doesn't just fall away. That's glass painting or whatever this is purely painted in, and this is all bogus. This has just been painted in. Someone's done an animation job which is really, I mean, that's pretty pathetic animation. Then you jiggle all the frames so that it's not so obvious, and you throw in a back and to the left so it's even less obvious. That footnote to that book where he refers to the wrong issue, I couldn't believe it when I read it. 1980 he publishes it. In the 70s he recognised that this head wound is completely bogus and the Zapruder film is probably a fake. And again, I wrote this before I knew you were coming. And I thought, so 23 years later, we're 25 years behind him, except some of us maybe. Just from the fact that the head wound does not match anything else. The blob in the grass, again, I'll quickly run through this, and the very first, within the weekend of the assassination, there's a few frames that they're coming up on the screen, but also here. Tear it anymore, that's already torn. This big one is the big one over there. Is the big one up on there. And there's a couple of little ones over here, which are the little ones over there. One thing to note, look at the quality of the image in the Life magazine, which you can examine firsthand here. All the details of people's faces. Jackie's face is just a shadow. You know, Life had the original film. What generation number is this? 6th generation or 10th generation? The quality was poor on purpose, I think. But this blob in the grass, which is sort of a marker that shows you what's going past. David Mantic published this in, I think, in Assassination Science. It's missing from all 3 frames on the first weekend. Some people have said, oh, but look, there's a puddle. They've painted over it because they didn't want trash in the grass, as the guy from the Conspiracy Museum told me. They painted over it. Strangely enough, if you look on the MPI version, this other one's MPI, but I made it black and white to make it fair. That same puddle is apparently on the original film. Right, so they painted over it for Life magazine, but they didn't paint the copy they had. They painted on the original film because, look, there's the same outline. Very hard to see, but if you look carefully enough on MPI version and maybe do a contrast enhancement, we're led to believe they painted it out and then they reintroduced a blob over the top. Well, that's pretty bizarre. The timing wasn't finished. The motion of this blob gives you an idea of the... Now you can see, if you look in that issue, you can see that you don't have many reference objects. And that's why they framed the thing so high. There was nobody on this side no bystanders on this side to make life difficult, the Newmans and the women. There's no reference objects because they crop it all out. They didn't have the timing finished. So you get this... The speed could be anything. Okay? The speed of the limo could be anything for these 3 frames.
They reframed it, right? There's already a full zoom, so why doesn't it show up on your... I'm a little bit surprised here. And if they reframed it, and you just said they reframed it, then they have to go above full zoom.
Well, I'll talk about that in a moment. I'll try and be quick, Jim. I might go a few minutes over. Is that all right? Greer's impossible head turns, we've seen those. Jack showed them. I tried it myself. You can try it yourself. In fact, if you... I think the one on the fixed seat is more closely represents the limo. And if you spin 3 times faster, the centripetal acceleration on the front of your brain and your eyes is 9 times larger, about 11 G-forces. I'm surprised you could still drive. Everything else. And it was a good job they did, but the point of the matter is they're double exposures. Each ghost image is a double exposure. And it's impossible to extract 2 images that are double exposure. I was looking through my computer and found an image the other day and I thought, who the hell is this ugly bastard in my computer? And I said, oh, that was the double exposure. These 2 are going to be linked together for the rest of the universe. And I said, no, that's right, I made the double exposure, I can extract them. But if I didn't have the original images, you cannot extract a double exposure into 2 images. David Healy? Yep.
What were the 2 images?
The 2 images. I'll just have a look, wait on.
Oh my God. Is that me? Oh my God.
That's my quota.
Jesus Christ.
Right. Bit of fun. Why can't you extract Jim and Tink? 2 exposures? A double exposure, literally adding together 2 light intensities. David Cube will testify to this fact that a double exposure is literally adding together the 2 intensities. There could be some nonlinear effect to the film. Easy enough to add 2 images together. I did it when I was my first camera. Took it to school and took a photo and I got a double exposure. add them together. Anyone can tell me the answer? 42, that was the answer. But extracting the two literally asks, what are the two things that are added together? What's the answer?
X plus Y.
Yeah. An unknown plus an unknown. You cannot extract the double exposure. Completely impossible. You can't get all the footage for the extant film from a camera original Zapruder film because you've got all these double exposures in the sprocket areas. You'd have to invent them. You have to either create them. But the problem is the motorcycles and the Secret Service and all that, you only ever see them just about in the sprocket hole area. So you've got to throw all that away because you can't extract double exposures. Where do you get it from? It's not in the Zapruder film. The ghost panels. How do you extract them? How do you get the peristyle? How do you get the people under the sign? How do you get the grass on the grassy knoll? You can't extract it from the original film to make a new film. It's not possible. It's either a genuine film, which we know it's not. It's a complete fabrication. It's made from actual films of the assassination, of the bystanders, and of the background, but not from a camera original Zapruder film. It's not an alteration of a film. The extant film is a complete fabrication. Only the background needs to have been filmed from the actual Zapruder pedestal. You can do it with photographs, you probably do it with film. Nice tripod, just pan around slowly, get enough images to create a nice tall, so you can do the full ghost images as well, right? And do similar to what Jack did with his 16 photographs. Zapruder, he may have taken a film, he might have been told to take a film, could have been there by accident. If he did take a film, it was only used as an aid to create the images I've shown you today. So what happened? And I'll be really quick now, Jim. On the day, most likely, in fact, you've got no choice really unless you're going to create images of the Secret Service agents and the motorcycles. You can't animate the whole thing. Most likely, a number of high-quality films taken of the actual assassination from wherever. Zapruder may have taken a film, or may have just been told to stand up there. Pilot film of Dealey Plaza was taken, if it wasn't already done. This is what I think happened. This is where I think David Healy's optical printer stuff comes in. If there was a Zapruder film, or if not, one of the other films, was processed, and maybe you just use frame excision. You just take out a few frames to get rid of the content you don't want, because you're only going to project it on a projector. You're not going to study it like we do. You're not going to publish it in a book. So there's actually two parallel film processing jobs going on. You can't complain. You got two coffins. You got two films. You've got the one that's going to be shown the morning after. That's going to be shown to Dan Rather. He's supposed to make an offer, but he runs out and tells it on TV what he sees, using everything that David Healy says. Right? You cut some stuff out, you put it together, you whip it up, you just bang. Right? A couple of days you get a film, you show it on a projector. People are so horrified to see what's going on, they don't notice anything. Parallel path, you're creating these images. Right? A few lousy quality images to put in life, then a few more a week later, or 2 weeks later, 2 days later, I don't know what's going on.
But the ghost images have to be taken from the pedestal, right?
The background has to be taken from the pedestal. You then put the bystanders in wherever you want them, wherever you think they should be.
But aren't our elements coming from the pedestal? And they all have the perspective of being filmed from.
You have to get the perspective right, but you can get a little bit off the pedestal and the perspective. You can't tell. I mean, how do you know that this person was standing like that and not like that?
They could also come from the pilot film.
They could, if there was a pilot film, but it'd be cleaner if you just had something of an empty Dealey Plaza.
Pilot film, what do you mean? It's a film of the assassination film by the assassin.
No, if you take a pilot film, if you take just a film of Dealey Plaza, like Jack has suggested in the past, with nobody in it.
I didn't know what you meant by pilot film.
Yeah, sorry. A pilot film of Dealey Plaza with nobody in it. Nice and tall, nice and wide, high quality, high resolution images of Dealey Plaza. That from the Zapruder pedestal, that's what you need as your background. That's David's background. This is for the image work. The image work to be published is like a sequence of photographs. The film that's going to be shown within the first couple of weeks is done with a film printer, optical printer, and you change things around. So for the ones that will be published, you do it as a sequence of photographs like the 1861 with 10 elements. Well, You do about 30 in the first couple of days, and then you do a couple more, and you do 200 in a few months. I think you can process a couple of hundred frames in a few months. This was interesting, whether Zapruder was actually up there or not. Hudson again, I like reading his stuff. This little pedestal. Did you see anyone standing up there you can remember during the time the president went by? Oh, there's a bunch of people in there, you know, a whole bunch of them. A lot of people in there, a lot of people in here. In the shelter or in that area maybe where Zapruder was supposed to be. Did you see anyone standing up there taking motion pictures with a movie camera? Oh yes, I've seen people up there trying to taking pictures. Right, people filming up near Zapruder.
Well, where are the pictures?
Whole bunch of people.
Where are the pictures of them taking pictures?
Well, you just get rid of all of them and you alter the rest.
With all the other pictures. I stand a photograph that should show the pilot cameraman.
Or the other cameraman of the actual... No, the pilot film is when there's no one there, and then you take one or two films of the actual assassination while it's happening. Like this. How many you got? 1, 2, 3 cameras today. Same story for the assassination. It's just as more important than my presentation. You have a few cameras getting all of the action. Okay? So Hudson says, yes, a whole heap of people filming up there. But did you see Zapruder filming? And we checked it. He couldn't see Zapruder if he wanted to. And he didn't. I did notice, and then he starts talking about Altgens over the street. So he noticed Altgens over the street filming. So he noticed people taking, he couldn't see Zapruder because it's out of sight, but he saw a whole bunch of people. There was a bunch of people in there, a whole bunch of them, a whole lot of people. A lot of people.
Talking about up in the pergola area.
Yeah. Near where Zapruder was supposed to have taken his film. So we've got some testimony that there was people taking films all right. Just that we don't have any genuine photographs left to find them in. Maybe. You might have found one, I'm not sure. Next day, frantic work to create that. Uncertainties and mistakes with the assassination plot. You've got to realise Oswald is still alive. The plan's gone terrible. Jim would talk about all this in much more detail, I'm sure. The plan has gone so badly that the images they were going to publish in Life have to be terrible quality, and you've got to get rid of anything that shows the motion when you get to the crucial part, and you leave out 3 seconds surrounding the headshot, or 3 seconds according to what we now have as the film, of the headshot, and you say that the president collapsed on Jackie's shoulder. I mean, that's a nice way of saying he got shot in the head. Right? You cut all that out, you make the rest so bad that you can put any story in between, right? Like Disney animators or, you know, The Simpsons. They send it to Japan or China to put the frames in between. Right? You've got to publish a few quick ones. That's what I just said. No images near the headshot used in Life.
You know, I would love to see a sheet of paper with these conclusions on it, because they're very rapid fire and they're conceptually pretty ambitious. So I would like to be able to see if you have it.
Well, I'll slow down a little bit and Jim will just have to keep pacing around.
Yeah, you're doing fine, you're doing fine.
All right.
Take 5 more.
Okay. So, in that issue, I should really show you. I mean, it's important enough to. This is the thing. The closer you get back to the time of the assassination, the more probability you have of finding the mistakes. Well, yeah. Well, those 2 big ones at the bottom are it. Before and after. And it's like 50 frames or something, or 3 seconds, or 50 frames you skip, according to even what we've got now. That he's coming down the hill, clutching his throat, and then he's over here, and he's already back and to the left.
Why is that a mistake?
No, it's not a mistake. It was leaving open the options. He's there and then he's there. You can fill in the story how you like. Let's wait to see if we can kill Oswald off for it first. And the description, the president collapses on his wife's shoulder. And in the last 2 small pictures, the First Lady cradles him in her arms. And in fact, he's back and to the left in all 3 frames. So having him forward and then flying to the back, that was put in later. That was the best they could do, I think. The thing was falling apart. The story was falling apart, and that's probably why the Zapruder film never got released until later on, until they sufficiently convinced that it was.
Zapruder film got released because Robert Broden
Yeah.
did this thing in '73.
But I think if the assassination went to plan, it would have almost been on the news. They would have had it on the news within a couple of weeks if I think there were mistakes that happened and they had to shoot him further down the street and things like that. And, you know, plan B, if you like. One of the things Gary Mack says, are you saying everything is altered? Nix is altered, much more is altered? Well, they have to be. If the Zapruder film's not genuine and they match up with certain aspects of it, you have to alter them. They're blurry. Some of the originals have been lost. It's a much smaller job than you have for the Zapruder film. The point about rounding up, you say, how can the FBI round up all the photographs? Well, once you've rounded up half of the photographs, you look in those photographs and say, who's got a camera? And you got their photo because you got them in a photograph.
I have to agree with this part. Doubting Thomas is
You're the
about the net and everything.
you're the prototypical Doubting Thomas. Sunday, I think the printing for that was largely complete. It could have been Saturday night. I mean, I might even give Tink that. The issue definitely was not running off the presses on Saturday night if it included Ruby killing Oswald, but it doesn't really matter. Sunday, Oswald is gone. We've got a bit of closure on the whole story. We can actually draw a cut, start tying up the loose ends, apart from the one that hit Tague and Magic Bullet. No, but it didn't go to plan, and he sort of was down the... Can you get it away with 3 bullets? You know, because Hoover knew it was going to be 3 bullets. Yeah. No, I mean, I think, you know, what didn't go as well as they hoped. Can we get away with a 3-bullet scenario? That's what they decided straight away. You know, we're going to go with the lone nut assassin. He's going to be up in that... It's going to be Oswald. We're not going to use these other patsies that we had lined up. He's just going to be him. But then, does it fit together? It was down the street. Can you get through the... Well, we're going to go with it. But at least Oswald's not going to say anything now on Sunday. That was genuinely, I think, added in at the last moment, because the text looks like they had an article about Oswald, and then they sort of put in an extra line that he's dead. And they started creating some of the better quality images for this memorial edition, which I don't still know when it was published. Monday, Life distributed. I'll show you the image, and if it's not genuine, it's got the newspaper name, so we'll try and find out if it's a genuine image.
On Monday they're publishing an image.
I think it was Monday. Maybe it was later in the week. I better check that.
That's what I think, but maybe you have an issue. Maybe you have an anomaly. I don't know.
The colour ones start going out. Early December. Well, that's when I say the memorial edition comes out, including the possible frames without blur, and of course the frame that will eventually in the 1990s become the front cover of the MPI's scenario. Still involved 3 bullets with Kennedy and Connolly, then Kennedy. That article by Paul Mandel in the memorial edition is bizarre, with many details.
I'll show tomorrow, by the way. It's not Kennedy, Connolly, and Kennedy. It's Kennedy, Kennedy, and Connolly in the earliest version.
That's even more bizarre. This is from that... I hope I'm not stepping on anything you're going to do here, but this is the from that article, just within a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks of the assassination. They know that the camera's 18 frames a second, 2 frames a second faster. The first strikes the president 170 feet away. 74 frames later, the second fells Governor Connolly. 48 frames after that, over that distance, hits the president's head. It's amazing what they know so quickly. And in fact, they have the director of the National Rifle Association repeated the feat with an identical rifle with identical moving targets for life last week. That's quite amazing.
That's got to be fabricated.
Well,
This feat with the marksmanship.
Oh, the fact peak,
Yeah.
The paragraphs come out of the CIA.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that the depiction, the event.
That's a good issue.
now, interesting to do with the numbering, we've got 74 frames and 48 frames, and the speed. That's what's referred to in those documents that are in Murder in Dealey Plaza. But it doesn't actually say which frame number, and I noticed 48 is very close to the gap between 313 and 358. It's not very far off. So
That's what they say in the CIA report.
yeah, if it's I'll have to have a look. I've only seen copies, so amazing what they have in the. And this is, if we take the current film, this is where they're saying the first shot. Right, so they're saying this is the frame where they saw the first shot. Why? Because it's blurry? I don't know. And this is the second. Now, the first strikes the president. The second fells Governor Connolly there. I don't know, maybe it does. 265? The shot to the throat, Since by this time the limo is 50 yards past Oswald, President's back is turned, starting to understand. But the 8mm film, they never mentioned Zapruder's name for a long time. The 8mm film shows the President turning his body far around to the right as he waves to someone in the crowd. His throat is exposed. In fact, in the first black and white photos, you don't even see him waving. He could almost be clutching his throat straight away. Okay? What looks, could turn into a wave afterwards and they make him clutch his throat later on. I mean, for all I know, he could have got shot in the throat on his turn in the corner. Well, that's my first comment. And the second comment is that this, as David says, was not a misrepresenting. And Dan Rather was not a misrepresenting of what was in the film, or Dan Rather was reporting what he saw. This here is a prescription for how you want to create the film. This is the script. This is what they thought at the time was the script, and they were confident enough to publish it just a couple of weeks afterwards. This is what we're going to do. We're going to make sure he turns far enough around to get shot in the throat, and we'll have him turning back around, and we'll fill in the details. And there are other problems. So, in the end, this now looks like a lie. It was a prescription. Interestingly, the guy that wrote this article was one of those suspicious deaths, wasn't he? Died of cancer in 1965 or something.
I don't know when he died.
Yeah.
I tried to interview him. He was deceased by that time.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I was.
He's on a list of slightly suspicious
I
deaths.
don't know about that.
Well, he's in somebody's book.
Also, I'd be careful about prescriptions because I'll show you articles that have different prescriptions tomorrow. That
Well, no, but the prescription could have changed as more information came through. What other photos are being published? What other evidence is there out there?
You're using the gold standard here as a Zapruder film. I use the autopsy photographs. I have a slightly different scenario. Maybe we'll talk about
I think the scenario keeps changing. As the days go on, they say we can't have that anymore, we're going to change that. That's why this prescription wasn't carried out fully.
it. Great. The true prescription will emerge when you can make the autopsy photographs with the Zapruder film, because then you've got a correlated thing from the two primary sources of evidence.
So they tried to do that. They did everything to bring the wound around to the front.
Okay.
64, things of a mess, magic bullet, film that keeps, I think the details keep getting modified. Eventually there's no trace of the non-fatal bullets. You don't actually see them at all. There's no blood, there's no reactions. The 6 to 8 shots, in fact, reading that, I think he's talking about just 6 to 8 shots in general.
Impact, no, he's talking 6 to 8 impacts on the bodies. That's what
But
he
not
was
on
asked
the-
to
not
prepare.
just on the-
That's what he was asked to prepare, was the impact of shots on bodies.
Yeah.
But
And-
he prepares
and-
3 separate scenarios.
Pardon me?
He prepares 3 separate scenarios.
Not to my
No,
understanding. That is a
I'm talking
separate
about,
matter.
he described seeing on the film. This is not what he prepared in his
Right,
sheets.
right.
This is what he testified to the ARB. This is Homer McMahon said.
Okay.
Murder, yeah.
Said,
I've got
the
that.
murder of Dilly Plaza says he sees 6 to 8 impacts on bodies from the film. He probably did at that time that he got those images. They probably were still like the surveyors that said they saw blobs coming out the back of their head. They probably got a version of frames which still showed that. Eventually this became such a mess, the actual early shots were removed altogether. You have to infer them from, you know, someone's cheeks puffing out, or, you know, dropped his arm a millimetre or something like that. Whereas apparently from the other films, it's graphic. You see it. You see blood. You don't just see a head spray that disappears and nothing lands on the limousine, nothing lands on Connolly, nothing lands on the windows, nothing lands anywhere. All this debris that went somewhere didn't go anywhere in the Zapruder film. Just went into thin air, disappeared. There's now just a single headshot and compromises are going on. I think this little forward motion, 312 to 313, was put in. I liked reading the story. I hadn't read it anywhere else about Dick Feynman.
Richard Feynman, yeah.
Yeah, Richard Feynman.
You know much better than I do.
Yeah, well, you wrote it.
He was Richard, Mr. Dr. Feynman to me.
Dr. Feynman,
Richard Feynman, I love that.
Yeah, I didn't read it. I never met him, but yeah, Richard Feynman. I mean, I've read just about everything he's written. Richard Feynman, famous Nobel Prize-winning physicist. He never mentions, in all his books, he talks about just about everything to do with his life, never mentions the assassination at all. Yet in David's book, he brought the frames to him and said, look, back and to the left. And Feynman measures it very carefully and says, hang on. He moves forward from 312 to 313.
Feynman was the first person to find.
Yeah.
Other than, no, I think Vincent Landry found it alive.
Well,
What year were you dealing with?
I'm dealing with Feynman in 1965, trying to get, 66, trying to get him to come out with a signed statement in Ramparts magazine that the head snap is forensic evidence that violates the official conclusion of the government.
Because then Josiah has a graph of it.
Yeah, and what happens was that I get crestfallen because I have this huge encounter with him. It's a wonderful encounter, but he takes out his little ruler and he finds this subtlety.
Yeah.
And the astonishing thing about this subtlety, and I'll discuss this tomorrow, is that that subtlety is in the original news story moved by the people that altered the film at 2 minutes after midnight on November 24th. I mean, they know about it, and you can find it in the public record, and Feynman discovers it later.
Well, I have an opinion about this I'm not going to express, but it's fascinating.
Okay.
That is going to be good. So we're moving forward very quickly, more rapidly as we go through, because Jim's winding me up. On to my birthday, but 2 years before I was born. The greatest work of fiction ever published, isn't it? Yeah, well, where was I on the day? Well, I wasn't. So, that's a very short story. The middle section of the film at least had to be created in something, maybe the whole thing. Now, whether it got created by February or March, doesn't really matter. In a matter of months, you can create enough frames to be published, to have slides. You don't have a strip of film, you just need the slides. Just need the slides. It's a very good point that Jim made. Other frames outside that one that were published in Volume 18, on an as-needed basis. You can just create those splices, you damage some frames, you splice them together with a really bad heat splice. You switch 2 frames just after the headshot. That's just red herrings. So you got people like David and Harold Weisberg and so on screaming, "What's this splice? They damaged the film, they left it." Right, so I think it's a red herring.
You think that's
Oh, that's a red herring. Yeah.
Well, I just
That's what a splice is supposed to look like.
Yeah, I issued a memo on that. So, I called them decoy splices.
That's exactly right.
It's decoy splices because I could figure out no other explanation.
Right.
But I still wonder if that's.
Distraction.
I still wonder if that's the case. But
That's the whole explanation.
Right.
Yeah.
If you create the whole film from scratch, why do you bother going to damage it? You don't. I mean, they didn't even have a piece of film, probably until the late 60s. They had individual slides.
So the late 60s? The film was rejected to the Warren Commission the most time.
No, I'm saying it printed frames, individual frames.
Did they have slides every single frame?
Yes, the slides were, every single, you mean
From 1 to 486?
He's talking about creating a continuous running motion picture strip of film as opposed to printing the slides.
But when did they have from frame 1 to frame 486?
As frames or as a motion picture film?
As either. When did anyone see the whole lot?
The weekend of the assassination,
No, that was the different.
You're saying that was an ad hoc job, David.
When did
what
they
was
first
printed in the report was individual frames they selected, and later they realized, oh my God, we got to put this together to
the
have
motion picture film was projected repeatedly to the commission and to Eisenberg, and those guys studied it. And Hume,
it's the same film. But when was a full set of slides of every single frame in the film?
The slides of Commission Exhibit 885 are given to the Warren Commission in February 64.
Yeah, but that's not the whole film. That's just
no, I
the
agree.
middle.
There's a piece in the beginning and a piece at the end. They start at 133 and they go to whatever.
I don't just that 133. But anyway, I mean, you create it within 3 months maybe, or you take. I don't know some of the details as to when. Well, mid-60s, maybe early, maybe 63, maybe 64. You create the rest of the film. Actual rolls of film, first day copies, camera original.
And this is not Steven Spielberg. I mean, they had to really work against some deadlines here.
Yeah, but I'm saying some of these deadlines are actually quite relaxed. Yeah. David Healy makes this point to me very often. When do they actually need the whole film as a film? Not just a film to be shown on a projector. What you see on a projector and what you see frame by frame, until you've worked with it for 10, 20, 30 years, you won't notice the difference if they're only slightly different.
I agree.
Right? And so the deadlines might be, these are the maximum deadlines from what I know. You can pull some of these back. If they created the whole film within 1 year, so be it.
But you must be aware that the FBI assistant director is watching the film that weekend and writes about it in his memoirs. And there's other people, right?
Yeah, but what are they seeing? Are they seeing the exact version we've got?
I don't think they all see the same film, no.
Are they seeing a quickly edited together version, but without the blur being correct and the ghost panels and the sprocket holes and everything? I mean, what do you need to be correct to see it on the first?
When did you see the sprocket holes the first time?
No, you're not going to see the sprocket holes through a projector, right?
Yeah.
So when did the sprocket hole area, which is
Willis told me when I interviewed him that he witnessed the projection at the Kodak lab of the first. I don't think he knows what's in it, but he witnessed it.
Yeah, but that's not what we have now. So you've got the film, 70s.
Could you go back one slide just to the last item? You didn't say what it was.
Well, it was just stuff. Well, I think it was allowed to be bootlegged, and Garrison subpoenas an actual film, doesn't he? Yeah.
Film allows you to look.
So by some
What do you
6
mean by,
months.
oh, yeah, I bootlegged
Wow.
it, yeah, I bootlegged it.
Well, you did. So now I haven't
I had 100 copies printed.
You're the one.
Yes. On the Valley Film Lab. I'll send it in the Valley. I'll send it all
Oh, there's
over.
Gary Mack just coming in the door.
With a subpoena, with his arrest warrant.
70s, look, I don't know what the story is with Grodin, whether he was used as someone ding.
I'll tell you the whole story tomorrow.
Good. Other films and photographs discovered. I mean, Life has another issue which David doesn't have here, where they discovered a whole lot of film
That's right.
images. Willis Bessner, not published till about 67.
That's right.
Right after Weisberg published his book saying, where are these other photos? They come out with these other photos. I mean, 3 or 4 years, not very hard to make some alterations there. Of course, Nixon, much more films I don't touch on, but we would do. 70s, so yeah, there he is doing that sort of stuff. Don't make him feel too good. I think the 80s are the wilderness years. I don't think really very much happened because by and large, except for David and maybe some others, I think the Zapruder film was taken to be the Holy Grail. Right? This is the only real evidence we have. Everything else has been, fabricated and fiddled around with. This is the only genuine evidence. And of course, if it's not, then it's a problem. People wanting to see the area between the sprocket holes, I noticed a lot of calls for that, and to the Zapruder lawyers and so on. We want to see the area between the sprocket holes and all these negotiations going on. So the pressure was going on. 90s, the movie came out, and the whole JFK Act, and the $16 million, and MPI does the final digitisation, the reference copy of the Zapruder film, so we can lock the original up and never take it out of storage ever again. Looked like they gave it to a couple of college students with a Macintosh to just scan that for me, can you? And of course, people started to realise there's something wrong with the film. Jack doing it a bit earlier in this.
I take exception to the word why. I just come back up here with my friend John from Minneapolis. There's 300 million people in the country, and we're doing our Lake Wobegon thing.
Growing.
There's 30 of us.
Growing.
That's 1 per 10 million.
Growing.
We're optimistic.
Growing. I mean among researchers.
Yeah.
I mean among researchers, not among the public. Oh, no.
He means the one you eventually found on jfkresearch.com.
Why do?
People don't, we're up
Not the
against
ones on Lancer and
That's
Nora.
right.
No. Well,
1 per 10 million, right?
well we've got David Lifton and probably Jack in the 70s and 80s. Thanks, thinking you think it's a fake, and he suspects it's a fake. Wider realisation that something's wrong. And then this story is to be continued. Thank you.
I think there's one.